All right, I would like to return to the agenda. We had a fantastic lunch. I hope you all did too. And I know Commissioner Christian will make his way over here momentarily. I would like to go ahead and begin the Administrative Budget and Audit Oversight Committee, of which I am currently chair. So I would like to convene this committee and ask fellow regents, Johnstone and Nicetoon, if there are any items on the consent agenda that you would like to pull. Okay. Seeing none, we will go ahead and move those consent agenda items over for vote tomorrow at tomorrow's meeting. Moving on to the action items, I would like to turn this over to Deputy Commissioner Chuck Jensen for budget presentation and discussion.
Thank you, Chair Albrecht. Before I get started, I'd like to make one quick introduction, if I may. We have in the audience today Shauna Albrecht. She is the new Legislative Fiscal Division Analyst that handles the university system. So welcome, Shauna, and we look forward to working with you as we move into the legislative session. Thanks, Shauna.
No relation. No relation.
No relation. A couple real quick thank yous as we move through the budget process. It's a tremendous amount of work on the campuses, and I always like to thank the campuses for their time and commitment and the qualified staff we have on all the campuses. And I'd also like to recognize Frida Hauser in the budget or in the commissioner's office for her work in coordinating all that work with the campuses. So having said all that, we are at the point of after lunch, so stay with us. We'll be addressing the fiscal year 17 budget. This is the second year of the biennium. So that always kind of brings a uniqueness to it that there's not a lot of new initiatives to talk about. It's a continuation of the initiatives that were started at the beginning of fiscal year 16, such as the research initiative and the tuition freeze. Both of them continue into fiscal year 17. It's a little bit of a transition from the May meeting. We talked at the May meeting about present law adjustments and things like that. That all has to do with the 18 and 19 budget. So we're kind of shifting gears back and now focusing on just fiscal year 17, which began July 1st of 2016. I'd like to start with a couple of general comments, echoing what some of Tyler said. I feel as we look at the budgets, my work as a fiscal officer on campuses prior to this was I always focused on looking at the revenue, and revenue ties to enrollment. And so I feel it's incumbent upon my office and my staff to ensure that the budgets that we're presenting to the regions are in line with what the campuses are experiencing. And as we heard this morning, that they are tracking. I mean, it's something I'll continue to monitor here as we go into the next number of weeks. So by the time we come to the November meeting, not only will we be talking about the enrollment, but I'll also be able to address any of the revenue side of it. Enrollment's one thing, revenue's the other. I mean, they are correlated, but I will continue to monitor that as the campuses move along here in the next number of weeks. The presentation today will be a few comments by myself. Then I'll turn the presentation over to Tyler Trevor, who will do the longitudinal and historical kind of perspective of where the system has been and where it's going as far as the funding trends. And then after that, we'll have a few opportunities to have a couple campus metrics of the 8 campuses of the Montana University system. And so to have a little bit of dialogue about each campus budget that does then, of course, roll up to the system budget. So that's kind of the game plan for today. Again, as I work through the budgets, I continue to be able to provide to the board statements that, I feel the budgets are reasonable, the campuses have estimated accurately, and that they are allocating resources in appropriate manners in line with their revenue. And again, like I said just a few minutes ago, we'll continue to monitor these as the semester progresses. So at that point, I'd like to invite Deputy Commissioner Trevor to present his presentation on the data on the budgets.
Madam Vice Chair, members of the board, good afternoon. Good after lunch. I'm drinking coffee. We're going to stay awake on this one. Absolutely. With the most energy and passion I can drum up on an operating budget presentation, I'm going to give it to you. So with that, Katie, let's let her rip.
Let her rip.
Woo. You got to go to the back up. Yeah. And then FY17 operating budget presentation right there. Perfect. Okay, that might be as funny as I'm going to get. Might be, who knows? Chuck just described kind of the flow here, 4 parts to this presentation. The first small section here is just a quick overview of some system initiatives, timeline. You've seen this presentation before, it's 3rd time. Regent Berkey, this is all going to be really fresh and interesting for you since it's new. Then we're going to go over budget profile, and that's the longitudinal history of current unrestricted funds. And where we look in comparison to other states. That's a new portion of this presentation, a national kind of comparison. Then we go into the system roll-up of the operating budget metrics, giving you an idea in areas such as what % of the funds are allocated to instruction and how does that look over time, and overall current unrestricted funds per student and how have we changed. Those type of big metrics. And underneath those big metrics are the campus metrics. And as Chuck indicated, we'll then get into some individual campus metrics and give the board an opportunity to ask questions. Not that you couldn't ask questions along the way, please do. It will make it more interesting. So strategic plan, just a reminder, we have a strategic plan. We're all aware of that. The 3 components of the strategic plan, I always will fall back on what Commissioner Stearns ingrained within us, that if ever asked a question on your feet, what is the university system about? What's the plan? You got to be able to come up with the 3 areas. And those 3 areas, access and affordability, workforce and economic development, and efficiency and effectiveness. I did it without looking at the board. And then we take a look at the 20-year history of system initiatives, just for perspective. And we've talked about a lot of these actually already today. We go back to 1994, the post-Blue Ribbon or Crossroads study that said that the citizens of Montana wanted one system of higher education. And the restructuring that occurred through the 1990s up to 2000, we hit some high points for my job. Certainly the student data warehouse, and Regent Nice-Toon asked a question earlier today about how do we connect our data with different systems? How do we pull that data together? And the way that we do that, although we are all on the same software, just not the same implementation of it, we do it through data warehousing. And our student data warehouse is our, I would say, most mature warehouse. Where you're able to see in performance funding the type of metrics that we can use to fund campuses based upon student success metrics. That's all driven from the student warehouse. As we move through the early 2000s, shared leadership initiative with the legislature and the governor's office, that was the instigator for our strategic plan. Very historic strategic plan that we have now, 10 years old, but really a description of what a system ought to provide. And I think the tenets inside that plan are unescapable, and they still are as applicable today as they were 10 years ago. Moving along, common course numbering, distance education initiatives. Tuition freeze begins in 2007, running all the way through this year. We develop a finance data warehouse. There again is data integration. And then the 2-year college initiative, we talked about that, the renaming of the COTs, performance funding, dual credit, allocation methodology redesign, and of course now the research initiative. So I'm gonna kind of, since this is the 2nd year of the biennium and we've kind of discussed a lot of these initiatives, I'm gonna cruise through this portion a little bit and land on this slide. And I guess when you're thinking about what you're voting for, when you vote to approve this operating budget, it's this slide and the next slide. And I'm going to kick it back over here to Chuck to talk about some of these areas. I just want to make sure that you're aware of that bottom blue slice down there that constitutes 35% of the overall operating budget, the current unrestricted. That current unrestricted is made up of tuition and state appropriations. Going straight back to the presentation we had earlier today, the connection between those two of the utmost importance to us. And the remainder of this presentation focuses on that area. But before we cut over to that, we want to do our due diligence here in talking about some of these other areas and some of the funds and the trends that are associated with that. And I kick it back to Chuck.
Thanks, Tyler. Would you go to the next slide? Okay. This is the summary of exactly what you will be asked to approve. It's a $1.543 billion budget. Again, as Tyler said, a little over 538,000 of that is in the current unrestricted, which we'll spend the majority of our time today talking about. But I thought it appropriate just to, briefly go through some of the other funds that are on this page. The current unrestricted, which is all of our grant activity on campuses, mostly federal grant activity. Current designated is all the sales and services type activity on campuses and some of the class fee and student course fee where those accounts are. Then, of course, auxiliary, that's all our housing and dining and other facilities like that on all of our campuses. Loan endowment, that's a really small account. And then the plant funds, that's probably a big increase there. And again, this is budgeted. These are where campuses are bringing forth their budgets for some new building projects and stuff. And we do have several on the docket coming in the next couple of years. Several of those you've already approved, several at Missoula. And so that's the main increase in the plant funds. So that's the bulk of the budget and those funds. We also do have the community colleges on here. I don't intend to spend much time on those. As we all know, those community colleges, their budgets are approved by their boards in July and August, but we do bring it forth as an approval item for the Board of Regents. And again, the community colleges have continued to be pretty consistent, and you heard words today about Dawson and the enrollment issues and stuff that have been there in the past, and those campuses are stabilizing and are doing well. Tribal college assistance, that's our non-beneficiary payments to our tribal college partners. And there's an increase because that's the amount that's appropriated in 17. In 16, only 786,000 was utilized. It's based on actual enrollment. So if the enrollment is there in 2017, then the allocations go out to the tribal colleges. The next line is actually the OCHI general fund budget. And real briefly there, the increases there are due to some personnel increases in benefits and salary. And then the bulk of that is in the increase in the WICHI-WWAMI programs, again, as that program continues to ramp up to its full contingency of students. And then the $162 million, which looks like a really large number, that has to do primarily with our self-insurance plan, both health and workers' comp. And so again, they're all proprietary type accounts where they're funded by fees and such on the campuses. Please.
Yes. I had one large question here that I'd like to get your response. So if you look at the MSU ed units and agencies, we're up 7% year over year. Mm-hmm. And if I'm somebody constituent out in the community, I'm saying there's been very little inflation this year, and I think our enrollment is pretty much flat. So why are we having a 7% increase in our costs? What's your answer to that, Chuck?
Chair Albright, Regent Johnstone. A large driver in that will be, of course, the plant funds. But maybe I'll back up and just briefly hit on the current unrestricted, which is, again, the main part of the conversation today. And your comment about enrollment. We are seeing enrollment increases in non-resident, and that's primarily at the Bozeman campus. So when we get into some of the detail further into the presentation, I'll be commenting on that the bulk of that increase is coming from that one arena, and it's MSU Bozeman and its non-resident tuition. So that's what's driving the current unrestricted increase primarily. And then the other ones, again, are all budgeted numbers. I mean, the campuses do project optimistically on, say, the restricted accounts. If they're going after grant activity, they have grant applications in, they're making sure that they have the budgeted authority to spend that if they do get those grants. So when we look at actual to budgeted for some of those categories, especially that one, that's where campuses are saying, we're optimistic that we're going to be getting some new grant activity. So you do see an increase like that. And then again, in the plant funds, that's authority for projects that are in the pipeline. So it does all add up to a 7% total overall. Does that address your question?
That's helpful.
Thank you. So again, that will be the gist of what we ask for tomorrow in an approval. It is the 1.543 billion, but that provides a little context into some of the other funds other than the current unrestricted. And now I'll switch back to Tyler, and Regent Johnstone.
Excuse me, I just had one other question. So what we're approving, the resolution is approving the overall budget. Is it also approving discretely each of the individual unit operating budgets?
Chair Albright, Regent Johnstone, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
With that, I'll pass it back to Tyler to continue his conversation on the metrics.
Okay, so what we have on the screen now is our state appropriations going back to 1992. And you've seen this chart before. In fact, one of the significance of this data set is this is a shared data set between the governor's office, legislative fiscal division, and the commissioner's office. And so we have kept this information up over time. We agree on these dollar amounts, and it focuses in on state appropriations for the education units. So that's our 8 statutory campuses inside those Missoula colleges embedded within the University of Montana, City College inside of Billings. And so this is a long-standing information tool for us, and I'm going to use this as the basis for the next couple slides. So going back to 92, what's significant about this? Obviously the flat funding era, and I'd almost hesitate to even call it a flat funding era, which is starkly apparent. From 1992 to 2004, we actually lost $1 million in state appropriations. That's not adjusted for inflation. That's that 14-year flat funding era. And conversely, after 2007, we enter into the tuition freeze era, and that's the growth in state appropriations. We roughly increased by $70 million from 2007 through 2017. That carves out a lot of what makes up our current kind of situation in terms of our current unrestricted and state appropes. I'm gonna bring in the tuition portion of this, but talk a little bit more about state appropes. And for every one of these slides, I'm gonna show you the actual dollars, and then I'm gonna show you the inflationary adjusted dollars. And so that's what this next slide is here, is the inflationary adjusted dollars for our state appropriations. And you can see that in 2017 at 195 million, it's the second highest year of appropes that we've received since 1992. And you can also notice the high points of the tuition freeze. Those are the full tuition freeze years in 08 and 09, and then from 14 through 17. Then we take state appropriations and we divide it by resident student, our resident student FTE. And you see a very similar trend there. A few of the dynamics, though, that start to occur is that in 2011, we had the all-time spike in resident students, which drives down the overall cost per FTE. We also had a lower funding year in terms of the recession had really put a constraint on state appropriations. So you see an even more elevated climb from 2011 to 2017. Once again, we look at that same chart based upon inflationary adjusted dollars. And then we bring in tuition revenue. So let's just look at tuition revenue on its face value here before we combine it with the state appropes for the overall current unrestricted. And of course, tuition revenue comes in two flavors. One is the resident tuition revenue, and one is non-resident. And the growth in non-resident tuition revenue, as we've discussed before, has been particularly prevalent in the last 2 to 3 years. We're budgeting for our overall tuition revenue now to be made up of 57% non-resident students. This is a combination of the tuition freeze and an actual decline in resident students. Exactly, an increase in non-resident students and an increase in non-resident student tuition.
Tyler, can you explain or provide maybe a little more color on the definition of tuition revenue? Tuition revenue equals what are the registration, administrative, and program fees equal to student FTE?
Sure. So that definition up there is that this would be our gross tuition revenue, including waivers. So the amount that we waive is added into that. And then the registration and admin fees, there are some of those fees that are recorded on the current unrestricted side. And so their portion of that is included inside of this. It's a small portion of our fees.
Thank you.
So then we look at the overall current unrestricted, and that's a combination of state appropriations and tuition. And I've used this slide before in the past to point out that during the tuition freeze era did not mean a freeze in tuition revenue. We continued to grow revenue. One reason is we increased resident students for a large portion of that. We also increased non-resident students and the amount of revenue we received from those. So at the end of the day, we grew overall by 49%, $160 million during the tuition freeze era. About 50% coming from tuition and 50% coming from state appropriations. Again, we can look at that based upon constant dollars.
Tyler, excuse me, question. What is the WUI, the difference in tuition with WUI?
I'm having trouble going Vice Chair Albrecht, sorry. It's recorded as non-resident tuition revenue, and the policy is that students who receive a WUI are charged 150% of resident rates.
Okay, thank you.
So then we build up to this slide, basically, current unrestricted funds per student FTE. And you can see a couple things here. That when we go back to 1992, that the state portion of the cost of education constitutes 76%. A lot of things happened over time from 1992 to 2017. We grew in non-resident students, so we grew the proportion of tuition revenue that we were generating from non-resident students. That helped shrink our percentage. As I said before, from 1992 to 2004, we actually received $1 million less. So the state contribution in those early years certainly swayed the percent of support. But since that time, 2007 to 2017, we've seen very strong state support and the support of our tuition freeze. And what it has left us with is now we're at 40% state support. And you know, just sort of a new era of that mix. You got to take into consideration our student population mix when you take a look at the 40% compared to the 76%. People like to hold those up and compare them side by side. I wouldn't recommend necessarily doing that, just because of the student population change. That we've had more resident, non-resident students than we do now than we did then. So we take that same slide, we look at it in terms of inflationary dollars adjusted.
So Tyler, if I could, I just really think it's worth mentioning, though, these last two slides really sum up and I think give you a good indication of what that tuition freeze era looked like. And, you know, I think there's some that have questioned, was that the best thing for the university system or not? I understand some of the complications that it created in some isolated pockets. But clearly, when you look at that, we have increased state revenue, something only 3 other states have managed to do in this same period of time. We've got increased total revenue, increased non-resident revenue. I mean, it has clearly been a good era in the Montana university system, and I just think we shouldn't leave this without acknowledging what has been done both by the administrative branch, started with Governor Schweitzer, certainly carried out with 2 tuition freezes with Governor Bullock, and the legislature that supported those. It is a remarkable time. And Montana's chart, I can't stress enough, looks so much different than the rest of the country. It's just remarkable. I mean, they truly faced the inverse of that. And we're just quite blessed with the scenario that's we've had over the last 10 years. And I think it deserves recognition for all those that made that happen in terms of our funding partners. It's been a good program for the Montana University system.
Okay, so let's just recap real quick before I move into some national comparisons, because that's where it gets interesting, I think, is when we take these dollar amounts, and we certainly have done well in the last 10 years, but I think it suits us. It's important to take a look at where we stand nationally. So our current unrestricted makes up 35% of the total. We have the flat funding era, the tuition freeze era. 50% of our increases during the tuition freeze era actually came from tuition revenue, so we weren't lacking necessarily in educational capital. Non-resident tuition as a percent of total tuition revenue increased from 41% in 2005 to now 55% actually for 2016. We're budgeting for 57% of our current unrestricted to come from, or our tuition revenue to come from non-resident tuition. State share, as we discussed, moved from 76 to 40. And then just overall, when taking into consideration the tuition freeze era, we've recorded the highest educational revenue that we have ever had. At the end of that, which would presume that that was the end of the tuition freeze era now, but that would be probably presumptive on my part. So shifting from that, I thought it would be informative this year to talk about where we sit nationally. And some of this may sound contradictory to that we say, okay, the last 10 years we've done great. We've done better than most states. But it's interesting to see where we still sit nationally in terms of funding. We may have done better than most states, but those states already had maybe at times twice as much educational revenue as we did. So while we grew and they may have shrank, we still didn't catch up to those states. And that's what I wanted to show you here. And we take a look at educational appropriations. So this is state appropriations per FTE. Very hard to see up on the screen besides the Montana number there. But I can tell you Montana ranks 37th in the nation in terms of state appropriations per FTE. And so this is data produced by SHEO, the State Higher Education Executive Officers. It's also been adjusted for cost of living and enrollment mix. Now those are some kind of technical higher education adjustments. I provide a slide in here, actually, in case anybody wants to dig down into those. But all states were treated the same. An education consulting agency basically did this work, not me, and they ranked us 37th. Then you take a look at net tuition, so you take out the waivers, and then you divide that by the number of students that we have, and Montana ranked 30th in the nation in terms of the amount of tuition revenue we produce per student. Now, when you combine those two, which is the current unrestricted per student, Montana drops to 49th in the nation. Our neighbor to the south of us has twice as many dollars per student. Now, I know they're going through some cuts, but again, this is pretty typical. When other states cut, they cut to a level which is still much more than Montana operates on per student. This is the efficiency that we've talked about in Montana for quite some time. We operate our higher education system on fewer dollars than almost every other state in the nation per student. And then you can take these line charts here, and just that dotted line going across in the straight line, the U.S. average, think of that as 100%. And then if you say net tuition revenue, starting back, and I apologize for how hard that is to see, 1990, about halfway through this chart, it grew up above the average. We were getting more net tuition revenue per student than the average state. And then slowly it declined, as you would expect with the tuition freeze, down to 2015, where we're below the average. Then you take the blue bar, and that is state appropriations per student. And there you can see that dip from 1992 to 2004, and then it starts to climb back up with the investment of the states, of our state. But we were still that far below the average. And then you have the orange, which is the current unrestricted per student, and we've remained below the average. Although we've made some progress, we are below the average.
Vice, can I ask a couple of questions? I'm
Regent Johnstone, absolutely.
sorry. 2 or 3 questions, I guess, Deputy Commissioner. Number one, have you looked at why we are efficient? I mean, have you looked at the elements of cost and efficiency, and why is that?
Vice Chair Albrecht, Regent Johnstone, we have a pay scale in higher education that's lower than most states. That would be one. And pay it counts for 75% of our overall budget. I'd look to other folks around the table to contribute to this conversation. That was the first element, large element that comes to my mind.
Commissioner?
Regent Johnstone, I think we could add to the list, but I really think that's the largest contributing factor by some multiple amount. Tyler said it's 75, 78% of our budget, and we're significantly under the scale. That is where most of the efficiency is gained. It's part of our earlier shared services comments. I think we've got to move to a new methodology and a new era of gaining that efficiency through shared services and other means of curtailing our expenses, and not all on the backs of faculty, administrators, staff that work within the system. That's honest.
You know, another question is, our state share is 40% of the total expenditure. What's the national average with respect to that?
Regent Johnstone, it's 50%.
Okay. Thank you.
Regent Lozar?
Just to follow up on Regent Johnstone's question about where we're at national average, and you say 50%. What about those institutions or those systems that are the healthiest? What would you say the mix would be of state versus tuition revenue?
Madam Chair, Regent Lozar, I can't offer you an answer off the top of my head on that, but there is an answer. I mean, and the healthiest, I guess you'd look to states like Wyoming. They have $20,000 per student, or they used to. I understand they are making cuts. I know that they have a very low tuition in that state, but that state compared to another state who has $17,000 per student, which you'd say is still very healthy, may have a completely different dynamic. That's the difference in the state plan for higher education. Some of those states may be a high tuition state, but a high financial aid state at the same time. And so Wyoming is a low tuition state, high state support state. So it's very difficult to say there is one answer and the right mix. I think each state needs to lay out their plan, given the culture of the state, the politics of the state, the needs of higher education, the ideal cost of education.
Madam Chair, whether it was the right marker or not, I think boards before you, going back 10 years now, that's where even this tuition freeze conversation started, was we'd fall into 32%, something along those lines, and there was an effort at the board of that time, and the conversation at the board was to try to return to that 50% range. I think that is, stated or unstated, sort of been the target amount. We obviously made a lot of headway, but that was the goal, at least at one point in time.
Regent Johnstone?
Thank you, Vice Chair. If the question was not what percentages does the state fund of total students, but what percentage does the state fund of resident students, what's the answer to that?
It's, Madam Chair, Regent Johnstone, that's closer to 50%. All right.
Please continue.
Okay, so the next slide is for those technical people who want to go through and identify what the cost of living adjustments are. And for some reason, the EMI abbreviation got taken off there, but it's the enrollment mix adjustment. And it's very detailed, technical. You can read it. It's online. I'm going to move on from it.
Why are you looking at me when you say that?
I don't know. I couldn't help it. I went from Regent Sheehy to you really quick. All right, so let's talk enrollment, because I know everybody wants to talk enrollment. Let's talk fiscal year enrollment, though, because that's what counts in the operating budget. And so we take a look at our fiscal year enrollment. This is straight out of the report that I give in May. When we take the combination of summer, fall, and spring, and we take the average of those with summer added into fall, and we see the trend that we have here. We've got about a 1 to 2% decline over the last couple of years, 3 or 4 years, and we're starting to see that level out. Gave you that update this morning. We think that there's indications that that's going to level off. We're not going to go down anymore. And that the campus operating budgets, which we'll talk about more here in detail, reflect that. If we flip to the next page, it gives you a little bit more detail on the kind of the dynamics going on between non-resident and resident students. We now bring in the projected FY17 operating budget. We're projecting a decline here in this conservative of 0.8. I'm saying that maybe we're going to be 0.2. I mean, so we're not wildly off here. This would mean that we have a little bit more conservative operating budget than the at least early fall estimate that we're seeing. And the growth and kind of the new era that we have here. We talked about the business model of the university system having to change. The natural decline in resident students has produced a drop in residents. We've gone out of state and in some cases done very well in attracting non-resident students by using discounts to have them come to the state of Montana. So for every one of these slides, and I'm not saying
Excuse me.
Wait.
Regent Sheehy?
I'm looking at that slide on page 25. I think it's the one that's up. Yes.
Yep.
So when you say that those little numbers at the top that in the next year's box, the 10162
Yep.
and the 25, these are the numbers we were discussing earlier as being precautionary, preliminary estimates of what we think might happen, but we don't have the official numbers?
Madam Vice Chair, Regent Sheehy, these are actually the numbers that we're budgeting for. We projected this for the entire year,
Okay.
and the ones that I was unable to give you the exact number for were the early fall estimates. And we're saying those early fall estimates are
Slightly higher.
Yeah, slightly higher than what we're coming in
Okay.
here. But I caution
Because that
those.
doesn't add up to 38.
It doesn't add up here, but that means
Okay.
our budget is slightly conservative.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, so now we're kind of shifting away from the longitudinal trends, and we start going through the system aggregate of our operating budget metrics. And to start those off, I just think it's a good idea to get down to what the current unrestricted dollars are that we have. For the education units, You saw earlier it was education units and the agencies, and that's the complexity of our operating budgets. You can easily make the mistake of including an agency in with a campus, and those agencies, they don't collect tuition. They obviously don't have their primary mission as to educate students. So we pulled the agencies out, and we just are looking at the educational units that collect tuition and have state appropriations, and we see there's a 3% increase from our actual 2016 to what we're budgeting for. And that's a $15 million growth. And if you look up a couple lines, that 11 million of that 15 million is projected to come from non-resident student tuition revenue. And I'll tell you just a brief preview of what the campus level operating budget metrics are. That comes from one campus. So that starts to paint the picture of what we have and going on in this operating budget. So we take the current unrestricted, and how many times have we done this so far in this presentation, and divide it by the student FTE. And this is what we would say is our cost of education. Remember the building blocks? If we started with this, we could then say, well, what subtract the amount of state appropriations per student from this? You'd be left with the tuition per student. And we've grown over the years, certainly, and the rate is about 3% per year. And I guess I'll move on to the next one. Expenditures by program. We take a look. Oh.
Regent Sheehy.
When you say we've grown 3% per year, were you referring to we've grown 3% per year in current unrestricted expenditures per student?
Yes.
Okay, gotcha.
So now we move to expenditures by program. And here we take a look at our expenses and where they will be, what are they budgeted, the program categories in which they're budgeted for. We have some goals that we set forth here. And we look to see that 50% of our operating budget is expended within the instructional category. That's where faculty are paid. And then in combination with that, we look to see that 70% is in a combination of instruction, academic, and student support services. That's kind of the overall retention efforts combined with instruction to give you a magnitude of dollars that are expended on students. So where are we at? In FY16, we spent 48.9% on instruction. We were short of the 50% goal. Now, I will tell you, you can measure this a couple ways. You can have waivers in or waivers out. So when I'm talking to you here about this, waivers are in. I'm going to show you some other slides where we pull the waivers out and do the exact same calculation. But then where are we at with instruction plus academic support and student services? 69%. So we're just under. What are we budgeting for? We're budgeting for just over 50.5%, and with instruction, academic support, and student services, just over 70%. So our budget is working to uphold those standards. We fell slightly short of them last year. That is right, and I've adjusted for the research dollars in one category versus the other. The MReady is our research initiative, and obviously this is a one-time, first time ever into this current unrestricted funding of $15 million, and it threw off the percentages, so I measured it with it in it and with it out.
Regent Lozar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We've seen a lot of metrics so far, quite a few metrics, but this is one of the first times we've seen the word goal. And so I'm sort of curious to hear, being a newer member, sort of what's the backstory to setting these goals? Because I think these might play into our larger discussion around mission differentiation.
Madam Vice Chair, Regent Lozar, the goal goes back to the strategic plan, and this is a portion of our strategic plan that got moved into our operating budget like you would expect it to. But you're right, it is one of the few metrics where we actually say, here is a benchmark and we're trying to get to it. The other area I would point out, and it's probably more informal than formally stated, is an 18-to-1 student-faculty ratio. We use that as a national benchmark, and we'll have an opportunity to talk about that goal as well. But what we didn't have a goal for was the previous slide, and that's the cost of education. And of course, for a system with many different types of institutions, 13,900, what does that mean as it rolled up as a system? Really, the meaning of it is inside of each one of those campuses and their relationship to their mission. And that's the portion that we talked about earlier today that we are missing.
I'd just add, and those goals are pretty consistent national benchmarks as well. And that's what a lot of systems are shooting for, including that 18-to-1.
Okay, so we move on to instructional expenditures per student, and also taking a look at what % of our expenditures are in the instruction function. We saw that we're budgeting for 50.5%. There's two ways of looking at this. You can say with waivers in or with waivers out. Waivers for me are hard to conceptualize when they're in, when they're an expenditure, because there's no cash associated with them. So I just provide it for you here both ways. Our benchmark is related to with the waivers in, so we continue to leave those in, although conceptually it probably makes more sense to say that 55% of our expenditures, the actual dollars that we have, went to instruction. You can see the growth here in the instructional dollars per FTE. And again, with this operating budget, I think one of the high points, if you want to take away a point here that say this is a good budget, is that we continue to put the vast majority of our increase into instruction. I believe it's in the 90% amount that we invested back into instruction. So that continues along the same path of the 50% expenditures. The growth of the education that we're able to provide for our students is reflected right in that measure.
Tyler, if you were to look at national information, would the percentage of expenditure on instruction be a net number or a gross number?
Net. Okay, so now we move into waivers and scholarships. This is a metric of the total amount of waivers divided by the total number of students. It just gives you an idea of whether the waivers as a whole are growing across, given the enrollment influxes that we have. And you can see for roughly the last 4 or 5 years, we've been fairly consistent. About 9% of our overall expenditures or revenue is related to waivers. We're waiving the cost of tuition for students. It's dropped. We're budgeting actually for a little less this year at 8.8%. We've had the slight decline in students made our overall amount per student increase just slightly. A little bit more backdrop on waivers on the next slide. We give you some detail of the categories we have here and the growth by category. You'll notice that over time, this goes back to 2010, so it gives you a long perspective there. We were at $30 million in waivers in 2010. We've increased by $10 million roughly since then. The vast majority of that growth coming in non-resident student waivers. Those are those discounts that I talked about, and that change of our business model to adapt to our current enrollment situation. Madam Vice Chair, Regent Johnstone, that's correct. Virtually none of them are for need-based. They are the ones that are inside the board designated category that we have $8 million there total for. Roughly $3 million of that $8 million would be based upon need. So now we move into student to faculty ratios. And before we tackle this in terms of the actual data, I just want to mention the HR data warehouse, because we talked about a student data warehouse, we talked about a finance data warehouse. That's what cranked out all this information. If you went through all the links, the finance warehouse is where we got that data. The HR data warehouse is what we've been missing. And we heard the audit presentation, if you rewind back to March, where it said, hey, at the system office, collectively, you don't have access to HR data at a level that you should. I'm just here to remind us all of that and to assure you that we are working on this. It has to do with a job categorization model that we're implementing. We're basically going through every employee in the university system and putting similar codes on there as to be able to count these people similarly across the institutions. Giant task. The goal would be that next year, when we put the FY17 actual numbers up there, at some point in time, I'd be able to do that driven out of the warehouse. These numbers are not. They're collectively sent to us by the campuses. So we count, at least for presentation purposes, in these 4 categories of contract faculty. That's full and part-time faculty in that category. The contract administrators, our professionals, and our classified. And then we have student FTE and simply do some ratios. So you can look across time. Student to faculty ratios is largely the one that we pay the most attention to. And you can see that we've shrank. I mean, that's has the fundamentals of the fact that we've had enrollment declines in the last 4 years, and we've had some contraction. We're now budgeting for 17-to-1 student-faculty ratio. Last year, we were at 17.9. What we realized that would be, if we had a stated goal of 18-to-1, we would have darn near hit it. And then you can see the decline in student to admin. As well as student to classified employee. And again, we have these for every campus. This is the system roll-up. We have this for each campus. Okay, we're approaching the end here. We have a page for the community colleges. I didn't want to leave them out. And then we also have a page for the agencies. I just wanted to remind everyone of the agency budgets. This was a holdover from last year. We had a good legislative session with the agencies. We had strong growth in agency budgets. They roughly each year, the biennium grew $2 million in the first year, $2.8 million in the second year. We saw increases across all of the agencies. This was good news. They don't have student tuition in order to support their budgets. So when they increase across the board, have employee salary increases, they have to rely upon the state appropriations. And finally, and quickly, we go over the summary here.
Excuse me.
Yep.
Regent Johnston.
Thank you, Chair. On the agency budgets, do we have any real discretion or authority over those? Are those established by the legislature or not?
We have full authority over those, but they are fully funded by the legislature. There's not a...
It's not a line item appropriation by the legislature?
It is a line item now for the first time in the last session. They, at our encouraging, pulled those out and put them into their own line item because they'd sort of suffered by comparison when you only fund a share of the increase based on state share, and that's been very problematic over the last 10 years for them. So they were put into their own line item, and that's mainly what made up the increase, is then they were fully funded instead of being funded at some state share amount. So in the end, I think we've got it right having it in its own line item as far as funding, but it's still lump funded within that program line. It's not like an agency budget that has, specific categories of expenditures. That spending authority is still rested with the Regents, and that's part of what you're approving.
Excuse me, so does that put those agencies in jeopardy potentially?
Madam Chair, yeah, I think it does, is the short answer, but they're also in jeopardy in the bulk. It's not like that they couldn't be affected within our total program. When it was in Program 9, now it's in its own. So I think they're always at risk, and we need to continue to seek support at a broad level for those agencies. They're an important part of our overall outreach in the MUS. I don't know if it puts them at greater risk, which is probably the heart of your question.
Well, I was actually more curious about what fund they are allocated under. Is it general?
They're still general fund for
Okay.
the most part. There are some that receive part of their funding from restricted accounts or designated accounts. We've experienced that at Montana Tech with one of their funding lines is the revenue estimates is not as high as we thought it was going to be. So those challenges exist as well. But it hasn't really changed the mix of that by putting it into its own program. A great portion of it still comes from the general fund.
Regent Nystuen?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I presume, though, that Ag Experiment Station and some of these various agencies, this is not their total budget for the year, because I presume they get federal funding and other ways to fund their particular agent. This is just really what the state of Montana is funding them at, but there's probably more to that, isn't there?
Portion of the budget?
Madam Vice Chair, yes, this is the current unrestricted portion, and so just like we have a designated portion, they do too. And so if they received a research grant from the National Science Foundation, that would be put into a designated account. This is looking at the current unrestricted portion.
But the designated part of that funding is still within the Regents' approval. It is in part of that 1.54, so it's in a designated fund. But yes, it's still, you still grant 100% of the authority for the expenditures out of extension.
Yep. Okay, let's just sew this puppy up here. Enrollment. Here's some new highlights, I guess, to keep us interested. We're budgeting for a decline in resident students of about 650. We're budgeting for a growth of non-resident students in about 370, 400. That produces an overall decline of enrollment by 0.8%. We think maybe that is a little bit more conservative than we're actually going to come in at.
Excuse me, Regent Sheehy.
Oh, sorry.
So I see what we budgeted for, and I understand that's a slight decline. We might have a slight increase, and you're thinking instead of 35,500, we might have around 38,000.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, roughly preliminary and with all the precautions.
Yeah, I was going from fall to fiscal year, so I'm a little bit off on the 35 to 38, but yes, we think we're going to be slightly up as opposed to the 35.5.
To the extent that there's a little bump from what we based our budget on to what actually happens, do you think that that increase will still be roughly 30% non-resident and 70% in-state? Is there some anomaly? Do you have any idea if there's an anomaly in the bump?
Madam Chair, Regent Sheehy, I think that if we looked at MSU and we could ask them about their growth of non-resident students, we could better answer that, and I'm just not able to say that. Because that's where the growth of non-resident students, that's where we're going to see it.
Okay, because that seems like, to me, like it would make a big difference.
Yeah. And with that said, I don't know the enrollment mix at the University of Montana either, and they might be having a strong non-resident student or stronger non-resident student year than anticipated, but I'm not positive on that. Everything I've seen is in the aggregate.
Okay.
Okay, so current unrestricted revenue, FY17 budget increases by 3%. That was $15 million over FY16, roughly the same amount that we did in the first year of the biennium. So this year looks a lot like last year. And in fact, approximately 40% of the growth comes from state appropes and 60% from tuition. If we go to expenditures per FTE, we're looking at a 4% increase, slightly more because of this, that we're preparing for a slight decrease in enrollment. If we look at expenditures by program over time, going all the way back to 1995, we put 54% into instruction, and we're budgeting for 51% this year. So we've actually gone through a dip, and we're slowly, incrementally improving the percent that we put into instruction. Waivers have grown over that period of time. It's a long stretch of time. Again, business model changing, most of it due to non-resident student discounts. And finally, well, not finally, but close to finally, instructional expenditures. I think this is one of the most, the high points here, is that since 2011, we've grown instructional expenditures per student by $2,000. So this is the dollars that we put into instruction, the dollars that go to faculty, the dollars that teach the classes. And another high point is that of the $15 million increase we have this year over last year, 13 million of it going to instruction. It's a 6% increase in instruction compared to a 3% overall increase in our dollars. So we're weighting instruction. The waivers, we budgeted for a slight increase, $400,000, they still represent 9%, which is the 6th consecutive year in a row. I mentioned the non-resident waivers comprise 40% of the total and account for almost half of the growth over the last 5 years. If we rewound to the last legislative session, we worked with the legislature to remove longstanding statute that limited our ability to provide non-resident student waivers. We explained that this is a discounting method and really part of our new business model. And finally, faculty and staff ratios. We're budgeting for a 4% increase in faculty, 4% increase in classified staff. The overall student to faculty ratio is budgeted at 17:1. Now, that kind of puts aside the end of the system and me talking, the end of the system presentation, and then we move back over and to Deputy Commissioner Jensen and some individual campus analysis.
Thank you, Tyler. And we'll go through this campus by campus, and hopefully we're not getting into a tremendous level of detail, but in order to kind of give the board a flavor for what some of the issues or some of the highlights of each of our campus metrics that now roll up to the overall metric. Tyler, are you going to hit on the campus metrics? And I apologize. These screens will have a lot of information on them, and as we go campus by campus. But I think in order just to give the board a little opportunity to get a feel for what's going on each of the campuses, we'll briefly talk about a couple of metrics on each campus. The first one, of course, Bozeman, and it's been mentioned several times already. The increase that they're experiencing in their revenue and their expenditures is due to their increase in non-resident students. And I think that's been a trend that they've been having for a couple years, and again are very strong going into the budget year for 17. And again, caveating that we're talking budget, so everything's an estimate, of course. And so as you look at, someone may say, well, oh my gosh, they're hiring 75 faculty. Well, that's budgeted. I mean, we know there are positions that will be left vacant for recruitment purposes and recruitment difficulties. So, always keep that in mind that these are budgeted numbers for 17, a campus's best projection of what they're going to be needing in the next fiscal year. So again, a very positive expenditure and revenue upswing for the Bozeman campus, again, because of their non-resident students. And again, they are increasing staffing accordingly. Yeah, please answer questions anytime. Please.
Regent Johnstone.
Thank you. Could you express the number of faculty additions at Montana State as a percentage of the existing full and part-time faculty? Is it 3%, 5%? Do we know?
Looking at Terry.
Vice President Terry Least.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. Regent Johnstone, I believe the question you asked was how many faculty do we have currently and what percentage would this be? So we have roughly 600 faculty, I believe, full-time equivalents on staff right now. So, and that increase that you see there on this report, because of the way that we do these reports, at no time during the year do we have every position filled. There are some vacancies that occur throughout the year. So the increase is the budgeted lines that we have, and the actual that it's comparing to for last year would include some vacancies as well. So there's a bigger gap than would actually be.
And the 18.4 would include these hires? So if you made these hires, you'd be at 18.4? Is that what this is telling us or not? 18.4 to 1?
In faculty to staff ratio, faculty to student ratio, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that would be based on the budgeted,
It's all budgeted, so
it's all the budgeted FTE in faculty. So yes,
But at
18.4.
least nominally, it's a pretty substantial percentage increase in FTE. Okay, thank you.
Approximately 10%.
Regent Sheehy.
This is a head one. How do I get to that screen from the agenda?
Tyler.
Yeah, I
show you.
missed that part, Tyler.
Okay,
I'm there.
so now we're on the agenda,
Yep,
and if you click on the MUS operating budgets, where you see my finger here?
Mhm.
You click on that. You then open up a page that has all the operating budgets on it for all campuses.
got it,
And then the third bullet down is operating budget metrics.
got it. Okay, thank you.
And then we'll go along the left-hand side there, campus by campus, as we, and again, like I said, I apologize for the level of detail on these sheets, but like I said, we'll try to highlight some of the metrics on the campus that are perhaps of interest, and to generate questions or comments from the board as needed. So that's the position where Bozeman finds themselves. Again, 18.4 faculty to student ratios, and they have a strong instruction expenditure percentage. On the Billings campus, and again, this is kind of relating back, kind of giving you a flavor of where the campuses are budgeting. And again, I've made an overall comment that I feel the campuses have done a very reasonable and responsible estimate of their revenues for the 17 budget. And so that'll get into a little detail here where I'm highlighting that, the campuses again have made, again, reasonable projections of what their revenue is going to be for the next budget year. And that's the case with Billings, of course. They've budgeted for a slight decrease in their enrollment. You can see 1% there. And of course, they have minimal changes to their staffing levels. Billings continues to be very consistent in their budget approach. As their enrollment has declined over the years, they've very adequately kept up with their budget modifications as they've done that. And again, their staff to student to faculty ratio remains strong, and their expenditures and instruction remain strong. Again, please, if there's any questions that the Regents have as we go through some of this data, please just interject. And again, and the next campus will be the MSU Northern campus. Again, they've been very conservative in a 1% increase in their enrollment. As you can see, you're kind of getting a flavor that the campuses are all being there's a lot of consistency from 16 to 17. We're not seeing, crazy increases or decreases on any campus. And so I think that gives you a flavor of that. They're budgeting for an increase of 1% in student enrollment. They are looking at some faculty increases. Again, I think that's as they realign some of their faculty there. Northern has historically been one of the lower percentages in instruction expenditures, and the mix of their programs and such up there. That's the Northern campus. Great Falls, again, budgeting for a slight decrease in their enrollment, and again, minimal changes to their employee categories. So again, a lot of stability in their budget. Onto the U of M side, oops, I'm sorry. A couple of comments about the Missoula campus. They are budgeting for a decrease in their metrics of 7%. But I think it's really important to note that in the 2 fiscal years from fiscal year 15 to fiscal year 17, this campus has made significant reductions in their operating expenses in the tune of over $10 million over that 2-year time period. And there's been a lot of conversation about that over the last 2 years, but I think it's just imperative for me to point out to the board that this campus has made significant progress in aligning their budget with their enrollment projections. And they've also made significant reductions in their staffing accordingly. So I think that's just a highlight that we need to point out that they've done that in 2 years. And again, I don't want to be redundant in the fact that, again, looking at their budgeted numbers for 17 and their budgeted enrollment, we feel at this point that, that's tracking. So I think that's a very important concept to understand as we go into the next number of weeks here and into the November meeting, that, we don't have a campus that we feel is outside the bounds of their budget. I mean, the campuses, again, have been very responsible, I feel, in setting their projections for 17. So again, I think that's incumbent upon me to report that as your staff member to the board. That's what I'm seeing. And I'll continue to monitor that in the next couple of weeks as enrollment solidifies and revenue solidifies for the fall semester. And again, as Tyler mentioned, we were talking earlier about fall to fall. I look at the whole academic or the whole fiscal year, which again, of course, started on July 1st. We have summer enrollment, we have fall enrollment, then we have projections for spring. And so from a budget standpoint, I look at 12 months and not just one semester. So again, I'll continue to track that for the board and report any anomalies that are out there. So that's where the Missoula campus sits. And again, they have strong instructional expenditures and a 16.5 student to faculty ratio. Montana Tech, again, a very modest increase in student enrollment. They are looking at some faculty increases and some reductions in other staff. Again, balancing out their programs. Tech has been one of the campuses, they've historically had one of the highest expenditures in instruction. They're at 60.4. That's a position they've kind of held as one of the campuses of the highest commitment of instruction expenditures. Western continues to be very stable. Again, they're projecting a very slight decrease in enrollment, budgeted enrollment, and some modest increases and decreases in staffing. Western continues to be on a very solid trajectory. And then finally, the Helena College, they are looking at a slight increase in student enrollment, and they are making some modest changes in their staffing ratios, or staffing FTE, and their faculty to student ratio has probably one of the highest in the system at almost 21 to 1. So again, that just gives a little brief overview of some of the metrics that each of the campuses are experiencing. I think a lot of this conversation will continue on as we talk tuition, we talk program review. I mean, those are all topics that they all blend together, as these metrics will be part of those conversations going forward. And so at that point, I'll stop and ask if there's questions from the regents, if there's anything I can clarify. Again, I'm reporting to you that I feel the campuses have reasonably estimated their revenue for fiscal year 17 and are tracking at this point.
Regent Sheehy.
Do we measure for each campus, for each individual campus, do we take measurements of the two measurable items to which Tyler referred, the 18 to 1 student ratio and the 50% instructional use of funds? And is that on these charts and I'm missing it?
Chair Albright, Regent Sheehy, yes, it's actually on each of the metrics for each of the campuses. If you go right down to the bottom of the...
This is Helena College?
This is Helena College. Mm-hmm. If you looked at the bottom block of numbers there, you would see all the ratios over the last 7 years.
So those are the 18 to 1. 18.2 is we're looking for 18.
18 to 1 for faculty to student. And then right above that, you have instructional expenditures, percentage of net expenditure and total expenditure. And as Tyler said, we tend to focus on the net expenditure.
Is that with waivers or without waivers?
That's without. The net is without. The gross would be with waivers, or the total instructional expenditures of total expense would include waivers. Instructional expenditures, percentage of net expenses would not include waivers. That's correct, isn't it, Tyler? Yeah.
And one follow-up. Those two goals that we talked about with Tyler with respect to the system as a whole, I see that we measure them, I see where it is. Are those applicable as well? Is that an adequate measure? Is that something we should be looking at, measuring branch by branch, unit by unit?
Chair Albrecht, Regent Sheehy, it's a metric that we pay attention to. I mean, again, you have a kind of a historic perspective on each campus there from fiscal year 11 to the current. It's a conversation we continue to have with the campuses to encourage them to move in that direction. So it's part of our dialogue with the campuses as we move forward fiscal year to fiscal year.
Madam Chair, Regent Sheehy, I think as a system, the answer to that is easier. As a system, then I think those are the right numbers that we're tracking. At a campus level, certainly their cost of delivery, there's variables. So I don't think it's quite as bright of line at a campus level as maybe it is to us as a system level. But I think there's certainly it's warranted to track those and to compare those to the system. I don't think that it speaks to poor performance, good performance in absolute terms at the campus level. I think it does say more at the system level, but certainly numbers that we've tracked for a long time, and I think give you all some insight to where the expenses are flowing. And that ultimately, we want to see as many dollars get to students and student success as we possibly can. So I think it's a relevant term.
May I follow up, Fran? The reason I ask is that as we look at redefining our framework for board governance, defining mission, I wanted to know if there were differences in there. As we think about mission, should we be thinking about those two measurables and how they change from campus to campus? And by seeing those differences, there may be ways for us to look at their mission in a different way because we've already looked at that data. We have that data going back a long way. So I just wondered, with respect to the two different topics, the budget and this governance framework, it occurs to me that those two things may be related as we define mission.
Madam Chair, Regent Sheehy, I think you're right on track. I don't know what those numbers are today, but I think you're right in evaluating how those play into the overall picture.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think one of the best things, Chuck, you did for us was put together your operating budget metrics. I think you emailed that out to us on September 9th that really kind of shows bullet points, a half a dozen bullet points that really, I think, capsulize each particular campus as it relates to their tuition, their revenue, enrollment, faculty numbers, student to faculty ratios, waivers, and expenditures per student. And that was a valuable piece of information, so I want to applaud you for that. And it really, again, I think gives us a sense of direction as to where the campuses are going as it relates to their budget, so thank you for that. And I guess I'd call the rest of the Regents' attention to that summary.
Regent Lozar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just kind of following up with Regent Sheehy's question, or I guess point of reference in terms of looking at mission differentiation, some of the trends that we're seeing here. These reports are modeled based on how we are currently structured, with the flagship split up. And when you look at it, each one of these ratios, there's wide sweeping discrepancies. I mean, expenditures per student are from like $10,000 to $20,000 in the system. Faculty ratios are from about 10 to 20. So there are these huge differences. But I'm curious, just in terms of starting this work around mission differentiation, if you've seen any trends or have looked at these ratios based on two-year regional and flagship institute, as well as community colleges. Have you looked at that yet? Because right now, the way it's designed, it's really challenging to take all these reports and then try to restitch them into these these 3 or 4 different types of schools.
That actually might be a Tyler response.
It's got data in it.
It's got data in it.
We're out.
Regent Lozar, I would say, we want to get away from this output right here, or at least the views of this type of output, and get into something that's a heck of a lot easier to use. But in terms of, let's say, two-year colleges, we absolutely have the resources to compute what are the current unrestricted per student averages in the Wichita region, and campuses that have between 1,000 and 3,000 students who are in rural areas. We have the ability to produce that and draw all kinds of different comparisons. So I think the fundamentals of these metrics are key to what we're talking about in mission parameters and the whole governance structure. But I think we could develop something a heck of a lot more visual and easier to see and utilize.
Regent Lozar? You good? Okay.
That concludes the budget report. If there are no further questions. That's agenda item A.
Regent Johnstone?
So, in one respect, this may be the most important decision we have to make, because the principal way we can influence policy is through the budgetary process. Having said that, I think it's a little bit hard to make a judgment other than to up or down, and maybe that's just inherent in the process. But as I look through this, there are 3 or 4 items that major policy items that I probably would have a somewhat different view on, and hopefully we'll be able over the next several months to get into that. I think, for example, that we're not doing not doing an adequate job of providing need-based aid, and I base that on what I hear anecdotally, and when I look at this, when I look at the budget, I conclude that we're spending very, very little money on need-based. The tuition, as I've observed before, I think hopefully we'll take a look at our tuition policies going forward. I think we've done a very good job of holding down tuition across the board. I think we may have done that at the expense of providing sufficient aid to people that maybe need the aid more. So, I will vote to approve this budget, but it's every time I go through this process, I have the sort of the same concern that it does represent the most important, I think, or one of the most important decisions we're asked to make every year, and it's sort of an enormous amount of expenditure, and it's kind of an up or down vote.
Commissioner?
Madam Chair, Regent Johnstone, I very much appreciate your comments. I think it is a little bit of how you've characterized it, but I think that the campuses, your comments are very important, because I think the campuses hear those comments. I think my staff hears those comments. I know, you go back 5 years or so, we were starting to trail off on the expenditure on instruction, and this board was vocal to say that's not an area where we want to see trends in that direction. And I think we've seen campuses move and budget toward those corrections. So I think the message is heard. I wouldn't want to say that your vote is purely limited to up or down, but we are in that current budget year. So to radically change it would create some strife on the campus, to say the least. But I think it's important that we have these discussions and that the region's voices are heard on those topics, so campuses can, as we plan out into the future, a year to 5 years to 10 years, work toward reaching those goals of the current board.
And I want to make clear that my comments, if I look at our strategic plan and I look at this budget, I think we've done an exceptional job, and I would say that to you, Clay, the staff, and to the campuses. I think the budget is consistent with that. There are a few areas where I hope we can get better, and we've been talking about them.
Regent Nystuen?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I concur 100% with Regent Johnstone. One of the things, though, that I bring from the private sector in my day job is the demands upon the workforce that we have every day, and the challenge we have to retain great people to serve our customers and serve our communities and serve our shareholders. And I think we can draw a parallel with that with the university system here, that it's what ultimately makes this $1.5 billion enterprise go are the people behind it. And I'm concerned in a fully employed workforce right now, how are we going to keep all the employees of this organization, and we'll never keep them all happy, but the point is You know, I know we're exploring what are we going to do next year with rising costs of benefits, and more importantly, what it's taking in the workforce to be competitive as far as salaries. I think over the years, my view is that the employees of the university system throughout have shouldered a heavier level of responsibility as it relates to challenging budget times, and I only see that getting more complicated and more challenging as we go forward here. And the concern that I have is that we've got to stay competitive in the workforce, or we're going to watch our good folks leak out of the system to go to the private sector or go elsewhere in the educational community. And so I guess I challenge us to start thinking about how are we going to drive up wages, provide suitable benefits at an appropriate price, and so forth. So I hope the commissioner and we as regents really start looking at that. I know we have to work in the context of the state pay plans and state government and things like that. But I'm telling you, from the private sector world, I spent a lot of time thinking about how we're going to keep and how we're going to leverage our human capital to provide the returns that are ultimately expected to our shareholders and our constituents. So it's a bit of an editorial comment. We got to do better.
To your point and your question, do we have current data on turnover within our system? Our HRDataWarehouse.com? Kidding. Okay, yes.
Madam Vice Chair, in addition to turnover, I can tell you we lose an awful lot of candidates in pools. When we get them in to actually interview and they find out what the salary is likely to be. And so we're losing good people in our pools, as well as especially young faculty members who are being recruited away. And there's not a good way to collect that data other than to just have the search committees write these down. But we are losing people out of those pools once they identify the salary.
Regent Sheehy.
Along the lines of the previous comments, the other thing that we've looked at in this budget is how well aligned the budgets are on the individual campus with enrollment declines and the changes that have been made both at the University of Montana and at Montana State University Billings. And I'm heartened to hear that those numbers are in line with each other, but it seems odd to be talking about the budget without talking about what's the plan going forward, and are we on track with increasing enrollment? Are we on track with the other items that have been identified by both of our leaders with respect to those institutions? And where are we on this? Have our strategic plans been developed? I don't know how it fits into the budget discussion in that we're budgeting for those institutions, but at some point I think we need a policy discussion on what's the plan on our institutions and are we meeting those plans that have been put forth?
Commissioner?
Madam Chair, Regent Sheehy, certainly I can give some thoughts, and then if you're looking for campus-specific stuff, we can do that as well. But you know, our office asked, the Commissioner's office on your behalf, that all of our campuses that are undergoing changes in any direction manage their budget and produce a structurally balanced, structurally sound budget. And that is part of the plan that we monitor the most, I guess, to be honest. But certainly those budget concerns can be reduced as we look at enrollment and what is the plan to serve the students and ultimately the communities that they're in. And I think there's a significant amount of headway being made on both campuses. I think you heard from Chancellor Nook and the the Billings group this morning on efforts underway to identify what Billings needs and how we as a university system can help meet those. I'm not saying by any means that that's the end of the journey. I think it's truly the beginning, and one that probably fairly so we should have been on earlier, but we've got a lot of work going on in those two communities that you mentioned to see that we are addressing those concerns both in personnel and planning and course relevance, curriculum relevance, all of those things that sort of factor into why does a student choose any particular institution. And I think those campus communities continue to focus on that and are making progress in that direction. And I think that their budgets reflect that as they are tracking, relatively consistent with what they're projecting. I think there's not a magic moment where this just gets fixed. It's a continuum of that planning process, working with that community, and so on. And of course, just mathematically, as you have small classes that have entered in for a period of time, that's part of the loading of the 4 or 5 or 6 year cohort. And so it's going to take some time, even with increased freshman classes coming in, to see that their overall enrollment trend changes directions. In both institutions' case, they continue to graduate larger classes than they enroll. So that alone is going to affect their enrollment, regardless of what that incoming cohort looks like compared to the year before. And so we're monitoring those. I think that's clearly what Deputy Commissioner Jensen's job is all about, and making sure that our campuses stay on plan, in particular to a structurally balanced budget, but also how those plans unfold to stay on that track.
Yeah. Just to follow up on that, I am heartened to hear that we're living within our means at these campuses, and I think that is very much a part of this report, and I appreciated you addressing that directly. My other concern is, as Regents, we need an in-way to discuss policy and procedures with respect to, are we on the right course with respect to growth, not tightening our belts, but growing our institutions? Is there a plan in place that is not a budget, that is a plan for growth, not just with respect to enrollment, but with respect to programs? And those things come up piecemeal before us. But I feel like today we've seen one piece of that, in that we've seen some fiscal responsibility through the budgeting process. I would like at some point to have a discussion about a check-in point on the plan that was put forth at Missoula last November, and earlier than that at MSUB, with some checkpoints as to the plan for growth and recovery.
Madam Chair, Regent Sheehy, I'm certainly comfortable asking the President and the Chancellor to speak to those. They are certainly monitoring those on their campus, and I think, while we haven't asked them to prepare anything for you, I think they're more than prepared to give you some indication of what's going on those campuses.
Regent Sheehy, members of the board, Commissioner. Yeah, I can talk about a number of steps that we are taking, and we had that discussion during my evaluation session, as you recall, and so it makes some sense to give you an update on that. And so let me go through and just talk, not in detail, but at least give you essentially an overview of the areas that we're working on. So with the bringing in and the restructuring of our Vice President for Student Affairs position, and bringing in a Vice President for Enrollment Management, essentially, Tom Crady has come and is focusing already on a number of important areas. Okay, one is just our recruiting and admissions operations that we have in place. We have already in the process of revising so many of the operations, including going to a paperless system so that we can respond within a 24-hour period to prospects, things like that. Tom is focusing on strategic non-resident markets. and increasing then our name buys in those markets and increasing the aggressiveness with which we pursue prospects in those non-resident markets in particular. We have launched essentially a campus-wide customer service effort so that both in the recruiting but in the retention stage as well, we have all of our offices tremendously more aware about customer service. We have started a customer service monthly award process, recognizing that to raise visibility, raise attention in that area. On the retention side, Provost Edmond is working on the areas of retention, first to second year, persistence through the rest of the undergraduate curriculum, ultimately toward graduation. And we have, in the last couple of years, reconfigured our Office for Student Success to focus more completely on retention efforts, more determinedly on retention efforts. Also in the area of then curriculum, we do understand that we need to continually look at the curriculum we're offering students and making sure that it's of interest to students, of importance to students in today's world. A couple of areas of focus there include data science, for example. So we have just launched this fall a new data science degree in our School of Business Analytics degree, Business Analytics degree in our School of Business Administration. It's already enrolling students that are new to campus. Last year, we launched a neuroscience undergraduate major, and that is enrolling strongly as well. So we will continue to look at the curriculum offerings that we have. The area of healthcare is one of those focus areas. So we have now what we call UMHM, University of Montana Health and Medicine, as a new initiative, calling attention to the 50-some health-related programs that we already offer, but also planning to expand those offerings. And so, for example, one of the programs on the new intent to plan list is occupational therapy. And so you should be seeing a proposal in occupational therapy sometime during the course of this year. So that curriculum adjustment is something that we continually need to think about. I think there's no secret that in today's world, prospective students and their parents are being a little more pragmatic than they were sort of pre-recession. And so that does play out in the choice of majors and the brand, I guess you'd say, that a given institution has, and that has been a challenge for us at the University of Montana. So curriculum adjustment is another part of it. And then finally, examining our financial aid offerings and the way we allocate both waivers and foundation scholarships to prospective students, making sure we're optimizing that. So Vice President Crady has been bringing in an outside firm to help us look at the way we distribute financial aid offerings, making sure that we're doing that in an optimal way. And so he's approaching that really from a mathematical regression point of view, being much more scientific about it than perhaps we have been in the past. So really, those operations areas, the customer service area, the retention, persistence area, the curriculum adjustment, and financial aid are about the 5 key areas that we are working on. When you are in Missoula for the November meeting, we would like to give a more complete, detailed view of some of those efforts and how they're progressing at that time.
And
does that address?
it does.
Okay.
And I think you had a strategic plan that you were working on starting in February and thinking 6 to 8 months. Is that something?
That's exactly right. So we've been operating under a strategic plan since 2011, and we have put into motion the renewal of that strategic plan. That effort is going on as we speak. We have a extremely energetic strategic plan coordinating council. They are in the process of holding forums on and off campus. They, in fact, will be talking to OCHI staff and individual regents over these next few weeks, or several weeks, I guess you'd say. So during the course of the fall semester, that input stage is going on, and then they will begin drafting the renewal of that strategic plan. And you can be assured that enrollment management will be a much stronger aspect of that strategic plan than it has been our past strategic plan.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Our response is hauntingly similar. All right. Though we have focused at MSU Billings in particular on retention. Our campus has really a low retention rate for a campus of our type. We've looked at peer institutions. Our retention rate currently runs, the last one was 53%. We set a goal of reaching 65% in 5 years, so approximately a 2% gain in retention each year, so that by the I think it's the 2019 cohort, we'll be at 65% retention rate, and to reach a 70% retention rate by our centennial, which would be the class that comes in 2026. For our type of institution, hitting 70% would put us above everybody in our peer group, but right at the very top of that peer group. 65% will put us about in the middle of our peer group. So it's a reasonable goal. We've had a retention rate as high as 63% within the last decade, so getting to 65 is doable, though our student body has changed significantly since that time. We do have a student body that is much different than what many people think of when you look at higher education, with 40% of our students 25 and older, and 30% of our students part-time. It creates some real challenges. As you also heard, we are working on a Title III grant, and those are only open to campuses that have a rather large or high Pell Grant, percentage of students with Pell Grants, and we qualify. So we are working on retention in particular. It's one of the reasons that we brought John Gardner in. It was a recommendation from our Student Success Committee that was created in the fall of 2014 and reported in October of 2015. We joined the Gardner Institute's Gateways to Completion program, which looks at courses with very high percentage of DFW grades, and then works with a group of faculty to look at the analytics behind that. And these, in particular, are courses that are known as gateway courses. They're first-year courses, typically, that if a student receives a D, F, W, or I, they're likely not to be retained. There are some courses that have high DFWI rates, but it doesn't matter because the student will go somewhere else. But some really are gateways, blocks. And we have 5 faculty members that are engaging in that and looking at their courses, looking at course redesign, looking at things they can do to help support the students in those, so that we can turn the retention rates up for all of our students, but especially at-risk students. We know that only about half of the students on our campus that qualify for our TRIO Student Support Services program are actually in that program because of the limited number of amount of service that we can provide. And we're building a program to serve a larger segment of that population. They are our most at-risk students. They are the students also that we do lose the most often. So it's definitely to our benefit to look at that. I think it's really important for us to look at these for several reasons. One, it's the right thing to do for students. It's a social justice issue. If we're bringing them in, we ought to make sure we do everything we can to get them through. But it's also going to impact our performance-based funding. As we as an institution see smaller and smaller entering classes coming in, the two metrics we really have at the university campus in particular are retention rates and number of degrees completed. To maintain the number of degrees completed, if we're going to see the 1% increase that we need in there to keep those dollars flowing, then we need to retain more of those students and work them all the way through. And we need to have more than a 1% increase in our retention rate. And so it's really important for us as an institution at both the university campus and at the City College campus to focus in on retention. One of the things that we looked at in our numbers is that simply moving up 10 percentage points. At first, that sounds like out of 500 incoming freshmen, you gain 50 students. But you have to propagate that through the 4 years or 5 years or 6 years that those students are with you. It turns out to be about 190 students over a course of a year. That's a pretty significant enrollment increase if we can pull it off. And so it really is in our best interest to focus most of our attention on these retention rates. And that's where we've put most of our attention. We are, however, looking at things that we can do in financial aid and making sure that those dollars are are invested in students such that they will most likely be retained, right? And not simply saying, well, there's need here, let's just spread them across. But where can they have the biggest impact on making sure those students get the education they need and they deserve from this state? Yeah, and this is where it gets really interesting. We too are looking at new programs. We've got the nursing program, the RN to BSN program that'll be on the docket tomorrow. You know, there's 49 FTE setting there that are absolutely new to our campus students. There's a little extra bump in their tuition as well, so that will be a revenue positive program. We too are bringing forward an intent to plan with occupational therapy. So our two institutions are talking a little bit about what that will mean, what it'll look like, what the need is, how we might work together, whether or not it makes sense to have two, what it's going to look like. But they kind of came forward at the same time. So we'll have to work through that, what the need is in the state. But we are looking at healthcare. We're also looking critically at business, because Billings is the business hub, as you saw, for a 500-mile region, radius. So it's really important for us to focus on business and think about what are the things that we're going to do in business and healthcare, at the same time looking critically at education, because we are one of the top producers of teachers in the state, especially for eastern Montana and some of the smaller school districts throughout the state. So we're trying to pay attention to those, look at what programs are going to benefit us the most, benefit this region the most, work with our partners that you heard about earlier, and lay some of those programs out.
Thank you. Regent Nystuen?
Thank you. That was very insightful, President Engstrom and Chancellor Nook. I guess this is a question that I struggle with a little bit. Do we, as part of our undergoing budgetary cuts and programs and things like that, do we ever put at risk our accreditation, parts of our universities that become at risk because we've skinnied down so far? I would presume accreditation is a really big thing, that we've got to make sure that we've got the resources to stay accredited, but are we keeping a watchful eye that doesn't erode south on us?
President Engstrom?
Yes, Madam Chair, Regent Nystuen, that is a very insightful question, and so as you perhaps know, I am a commissioner on the Northwest Commission, which is our accrediting agency.
So you get a free pass?
All of these.
You gotta
I wish I get a free pass, but we don't get a free pass, but we have gotten, I won't call it a free pass, but we are in a very favorable situation with the Northwest Commission in that the Northwest Commission has identified 4 institutions to conduct essentially a leadership pilot study in student outcomes. And they picked those institutions based on quality indicators. University of Montana is not only one of those 4 institutions, but we have actually been asked to lead that project. So Associate Provost Nathan Lindsay, who's here in the audience, is the lead for the Northwest Commission on this special project. So they wouldn't pick a school that they were worried about in terms of accreditation. I can tell you, without going into any specifics, that the institutions around the table are in great standing with the Northwest Commission, and there is a huge distance between where any of us are at and the threat of accreditation, the threat of loss of accreditation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner?
Madam Chair, Regent Nystuen, I would just circle back to the metrics. I mean, I appreciate your statement, and I understand sort of the notion of skinning down, but remember, that doesn't always mean skinning down services to the students. We're adjusting the budget to meet the student population that is present on any campus, but in many instances, our funding per student, state share per student, total amount of expenditure per student has risen, and ratios like faculty to student ratio have actually declined. So from an accreditor's eyes, we're moving in the right direction on many of those. I don't think, I think what has been done on the budget in all of our campuses that have seen some reductions is fiscally prudent to live within our means, as Regent Sheehy said, and I think that's the right move. But it's not cutting services to students. It is aligning overall expenditures with the student population that is there. And I think we're very aware of that. We've been very cognizant of that. It's living within a structurally balanced budget. But that the reductions that they've seen in most cases have been less than the student reduction that we've seen. So in many cases, we leave ourselves in better shape from an accreditation standpoint.
Again, thank you, Mr. Commissioner. I guess I wasn't sounding a 911 alarm or anything like that, but I know, at least from my days in the community college, we paid so close attention to the accreditation standards, and you want to get a free, not a free pass, the green light to proceed. And I'm just wondering what resources, additional resources, perhaps may be needed from the Commissioner's Office, the Board of Regents, and so forth, to really maintain the highest level of standards as it relates to accreditation. So, thank you.
Thank you. Unless we have any further discussion, is everyone comfortable moving item A forward? If so, I would like to propose that we take a break, and then we can return from break and move on to item B. Is that acceptable? Okay. If everyone, you're welcome. If we could just return at, let's see, 3:55, 15-minute break. Thank you. Deputy Commissioner Jensen, if you could go ahead and take us to item B on our budget agenda.
Thank you, Chair Albright. I'd like to call to the podium Vice President Mike Reed from the University of Montana to speak on item A. Item B, I'm sorry, excuse me.
Hopefully that's better. The University of Montana is requesting approval to proceed with programming and design services for a new academic edition of the Phyllis J. Washington Education Center. The planned addition will provide state-of-the-art classrooms and learning space. The new space will provide advanced technologies, equipment, enhanced experiential learning, and space for innovative programming and clinical instruction. Total addition would be approximately 35,000 square feet. The addition would be funded completely from private dollars. The planning and design work is anticipated to be approximately $1.6 million. This will be a comprehensive design, takes it right to the construction documents, with an anticipated total construction cost of approximately $20 million, which is being requested as an authority only in the upcoming LRBP process. Additionally, the planned facilities are intended to expand services in the areas of autism, early childhood education, and digital learning to address both state and national needs. I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Any questions from the committee or members of the board? Regent Johnstone.
Yes, thank you, Chair Albright. So what we're talking about now is authorizing design and construction expenditures, which you'll fund from private sources. Will the building itself, will the funding of the building be funded with long-range building funds, or you'll merely request authority to build it and you will fund the cost with private funds? That's what I didn't quite understand.
Regent Johnstone, Madam Chair. The request right now is for $1.6 million for planning and design for a project that would be constructed with private dollars, but we are asking for authority through the LRBP process with the intent of coming for O&M dollars in the future after construction.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I would just like to comment that, when one of your earlier points, Regent Sheehy, was, of course, is this align with overall strategy? And it's certainly, if President Engstrom, if you could speak to the alignment of this project with your overall strategic plan.
Yeah, certainly, Madam Chair, members of the board. This very much aligns with our overall strategic plan. We certainly want to continue to provide the absolute best facilities we can for our students who are studying in these critical areas like early childhood, autism, and so on. Those are increasingly popular areas for our campus and our College of Education, and we need the facilities to do that effectively. Part of attracting to a campus more students and better students is to make sure that we are providing them with as close to state-of-the-art facilities to learn in as we possibly can. And that's really what this is about, is expanding our ability to provide great classroom space, great laboratory space for our students who are in those critical areas of education. So it's very much a part of moving forward at the University of Montana and attracting more and more students to study in these areas.
Thank you. And I'm pleased to hear that these are private dollars. Any other questions or comments? Okay. If there are none, then we will move on to item C. Thank you, Vice President Reed.
Chair Albright, items C and D relate to Montana Tech. We've asked Chancellor Blackadder to address those two items.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner, Madam Chair. The first item is a request to move a building. There are several buildings that were down on a site near Silver Bowl Creek, and the county is going to remove those as part of a cleanup effort along that creek, and we have received that building and want to put it back up near our mine, the Orphan Boy mine. We have a mine shaft that goes in there that's an underground laboratory. And there's a rough diagram, or at least a conceptual diagram, of what that would look like. It would be back over the hill behind the NRB, if you're familiar with our campus. And that building would be put up and completed with private funds. I'll stand for any questions, Madam Chair.
Any questions? Seeing none, we can move to the next item.
This is a request as we move forward with our Living Learning Center, as we've called it in the past. It's also a Student Success Center. The Living Learning Center, the living component of that, we're working with the University of Montana, Missoula to obtain bonding for a dormitory that will be approximately 175 to 200 beds, and we continue to do that design process. The Student Success Center would be the fourth floor of that building, and that's a privately funded floor that would be for it will include enrollment services, but it will include basically a commons area and a student union kind of area on the top floor. We presented these items before. We're just making the next steps forward in the design process. So I'd stand for any questions.
Any questions from committee members or members of the board? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Oh, pardon me. Regent Lozar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick question on, you said significant progress has been made in raising private support for the learning component. What does that mean? I mean, how far along are we? What's the amount that we're looking at?
Regent Lozar, we're about $3.5 million out of $7 million projected need. So about halfway there.
Thank you, Chancellor Blackadder.
Thank you.
Regent Chair, the next four agenda items relate to MSU Bozeman. Terry Least, Vice President, will address each of those.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the board and of the committee. This first item is asking for your authorization for general spending authority for parking and street projects on campus for the next several 2 to 3 years. These are a similar item that you would have seen in the past. They cover things ranging from routine things like crack sealing and asphalt repair to resurfacing entire parking lots and streets. So without further ado on this one, I think I'll just ask if you have any questions and we can move on.
Any questions? Seeing none, go ahead and move to the next item.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. This next item is asking for your permission to expand authority for the construction of a new dining hall. You may recall that we came to the board last November seeking a new dining hall. You granted that request, And after doing the programming and design process, it revealed two things. Number one, that we needed some more seating capacity in this facility, and also that there is some additional excavating that could happen on the lower level and would provide us some additional very, very low-cost space for other programmatic use. And so that's what this request is for, is to ask for additional authority for those items specifically. Again, no additional debt would be incurred with this request, and there's no state funding as well. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Regent Johnstone.
Yes, thank you. Could you just explain in a little bit more detail the total cost and then the source of funds for the total cost? I'm sorry.
Yes, Madam Chair and Regent Johnstone, total cost of this additional request or the project as a whole?
The project as a whole,
Yeah.
with the additional request,
Right.
please.
So the original request was for $15.5 million, and this request is for another $2.6 million, so up to $18.1 million. And again, I think it's important to understand that this facility will serve about 1 million meals a year. So while that is a large dollar amount for a facility, we understand that. You know, our previous dining halls served us very well for 50 years. This is a long-term investment, and Miller Dining Hall has been very, very successful. We anticipate that this one will serve us for many years very well as well as that one.
But what are the sources of funds to pay the cost?
I'm sorry. So these are auxiliary revenues, so essentially dining plans that our students would to pay. We also have faculty staff who buy plans to eat while they're working on campus. So, but mostly from students who live on campus and those who don't live on campus but choose to have a meal plan with us while they're attending university.
So do you anticipate issuing additional revenue bonds to finance it, or you'll finance it from cash flow?
This piece, I'm sorry, yeah, Regent Johnson, this additional piece will just come from additional operating revenues and reserves from the auxiliary operation.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Seeing none, if you would like to move on to item G.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. This item is for programming, to proceed with programming and design services for Romney Hall. You know that Romney Hall is our #1 request on our university system long-range building plan. And the bottom line is that we want to we're not trying to get out in front of the legislature here, but we really need to have this facility done. And if we wait and have to proceed later with the programming and design, it will put us back by at least a year of serving the students that we intend to do so. So it's important that we renovate this building, and it's important that we do so as quickly as possible. And this is a way, if you so approve, for us to get that done at least a year in advance if we get legislative approval for funding of the construction portion. So this is just for the programming of what will be in the building. It will turn this building into a fully functional academic facility, and that's exactly what we need right now. Happy to answer any questions.
Regent Johnstone.
If you do not get legislative approval, do you have an alternative means of financing the building?
Madam Chair and Regent Johnstone, that is an excellent question. And I mean, the answer is we believe as an educational facility that this facility should be funded through state funding. If that doesn't occur this time, we know that this design could be used at a later point, regardless of the type of funding that we use. So we're confident that this investment will pay off at some point.
Thank you.
As a question related to that, will this design provide any updated estimate to your 2011, I believe, $28 million for Romney Hall? I'm concerned about whether that is a current estimate that perhaps is out of date.
Yeah, Madam Chair, that also is an excellent question. And given the timeline that this has been since the original estimate, that's another reason why we feel that making this investment, knowing that inflation has occurred, that the cost of that building may be more than that original estimate. But if we can get the full funding from the legislature, sort of the difference in the inflationary cost now will be partially offset by this design cost that we will be making an investment on ourselves. Instead of normally this part of the cost would have been included in the 28 million. So I mean, I guess to answer your question, there has been inflation. That 28 million is probably a little outdated, but we feel comfortable that we can do a very good job with this building with the 28 million and us making this investment in the design process.
Thank you. Commissioner Christian?
Madam Chair, members of the board, I would just say we're very supportive of this proposal moving forward, and I would comment that it is not without precedence. We have done this sort of pre-design work in the past. In fact, at Missoula College, we authorized some expenditures toward the master plan and design of that facility in advance of the legislature. So I certainly am aware that we need legislative support on this building, and it's been our priority for a while and will continue to be. It is a project that very much needs to get done, and it needs to happen sooner and later to meet the current student demands. And I feel like it's warranted. I think Terry really has addressed a few of the topics in terms of we may have to put some other monies in anyway, given the estimate and the date of that estimate. And so I think it is good money, wise money spent to try to get this design moving forward so we can serve those students on a significantly sooner timeline than if we continue to wait.
Thank you. Any other questions? Regent Sheehy.
Commissioner, do you have any preference with respect to the alternative funding sources, and what are the differences between the two? It says current unrestricted funds and/or funds from the Regents approved designated revolving reserve fund.
Madam Chair, Regent Sheehy, no, we would leave that to the campus to fund at their discretion, fitting their cash flow, having least impact to the campus budget. That would be up to them.
Any further questions? Regent Niceton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It was about a month ago, Regent Johnstone and I received a tour of Romney Hall. For that caliber of a investment on that campus, especially with the enrollment metrics that are going on right now, if you other regents haven't been in Romney Hall, you got to make a trip and go see it. It's that big a deal to take a look at the structure of that fine old building and to get a conceptual view of what it could be. And it was well worth the extra miles to go see that. So if you haven't been there, you ought to go. It's a recommendation.
Thank you. President Cruzado.
Yeah, Madam Chair and members of the board, I think that by now many of you can recite what I'm going to say about Romney Hall, since it's been many years repeating the same story about this hero building that stands right smack in the heart of campus, and yet we cannot use it as it needs to be used. And still, we do conduct classes every day in that building, in the horrible, dilapidated state that it is. And I feel that our students and their parents and their families deserve much better. But we are, at this moment, living without any resource. The purpose of this is quite honestly to accelerate the timeline in which the building can be delivered. Terry is being very conservative today in front of the Regents, but a few months ago, when I met with the team and they presented the final timeline, the date for delivery was January of 2021. I cannot continue to wait that long. Even if the legislature were to approve this now, we're talking about December of 19 or January of 2020 at the earliest. It will be almost 10 years of coming back to the legislature and to the Regents and to implore that please allow us to make the best use of this wonderful building for the sake of our students.
Thank you. Any other questions on this topic? All right, seeing none, if you'd like to finish with item H.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for that excellent discussion on those previous topics. I appreciate the comments. This last item is one in our student union building. It's the chiller, essentially how do we control air temperature in our student union building, which gets a lot of use, not only by students, but conferences and other things that we do to support the community. And this chiller, when I asked our team, how old is this chiller? And they really didn't know. They know that it's more than 30 years, it may be more than 40 years, but they also know that it's on its last leg, and we've been limping it along for quite some time. So it's not an inconsequential expense. It's a little over $1.2 million is the request that we're asking for. But this is also a long-term investment and will serve the community and our students for many, many years in terms of comfort level in that building. So if you have any specific questions, we are using the energy performance contracting method to procure this. You may, for those of you that were around several years ago, we did some energy performance contracting mostly in our residence halls and that type of thing, and we're able to use that same contract for this particular project, and that will help us get it done on time, because we have to have this done by spring. We're very afraid that it will not work for commencement and other things starting next summer, or next spring and summer. And so with that, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer those, but this is a maintenance concern. Thank you.
Any questions for members of the board or committee? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Chair Albright, that concludes the action items on the agenda. There is an informational item.
Spot on time, too, I might add.
Yes, we are back on time. Thank you very much. At this point, I would ask Deputy Commissioner Kevin McCrae to come forward. To talk about the naming work group update.
Thank you, Regent Albrecht. As we remember, the May discussion of the Board of Regents culminated with a recommendation that the Commissioner's Office coordinate an informal group to look into policies and procedures related to naming of university property and programs, especially as the concept of naming relates to gifts. So the good news is this summer we did put together a little work group, and we've had good communication thus far, and it is continuing. The group consists of the Foundation President, CEO Shane Geese, the MSU Alumni Foundation President, CEO Chris Murray, Regents Sheehy, Regents Albrecht, President Engstrom has joined us in the conversation, and then MUS Legal Counsel Vivian Hamill and myself. So we've had some recent discussions just to sort of get communication flowing to talk about the interests of the foundation and procedures and considerations that a foundation makes when it's cultivating donors and developing potential gifts, especially when then gifts develop a facet that might involve naming of university property or programs, and also the interests and the obligations of the Board of Regents in terms of the public process of conducting the board's business. So the upshot is, the good news is if the board is interested, if the commissioner would recommend, our little work group has decided that we would propose to the commissioner that perhaps at the November meeting we have maybe not necessarily a board education component, but an opportunity for the foundation representatives to present information and appear and answer questions. The types of things that we could potentially look into would be policy review of the foundations, purpose of foundation, donor cultivation process review, and so forth. So I think I could accurately describe the nature of our conversation was that, certainly neither the foundation nor the Office of the Commissioner of Higher Education would want to get down into the weeds in areas of the other organization's business, but we do have a mutual interest in maintaining and continuing to develop an environment where dynamic foundations are expected to and able to bring forth proposals that will help students, and that if those proposals do involve an aspect of naming university property, university programs, that if there's, I'm not saying that there's an element of mystery to that process in terms of how donor cultivation works, how the discussion of naming first may come up, and then how a proposal ends up before the board. But for anyone who disagrees and does perceive that there maybe is a mystery to it, our goal is to demystify that process, to communicate and make sure we are out in the open in terms of how the process worked. So I will close there, and a couple of the regents are on that work group, and you can steer me straight if I've missed anything there.
Martha, or Regent Sheehy, did you have any comments?
That's my recollection, too, of what we were proposing, that it would allow for discussion amongst board members at this stage of our work. And I also recollect that we were going to do a little bit of comparison with what other schools do, in addition to looking at our own policies.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. You may go.
Sure you want to hit the gavel there?
Okay. We don't have any other items for this particular committee agenda, and so I would go ahead and adjourn this portion of the meeting, this committee meeting, and we can move on to the next item, which is public comment. Ready to move into? So at this portion of the meeting, we would welcome anyone to come forward for public comment. We simply ask that you state your name. Is there anything else that we have somebody? No? Good afternoon. Welcome.
There we are. Well, good afternoon, Commissioner Christian, members of the Board of Regents. For the record, my name is John Bollinger. I live here in Billings, Montana. Last Sunday, the 11th day of September, the Billings Gazette awakened the people of Billings as well as eastern Montana with an editorial or an opinion page that caught our attention. It pointed out the needs of higher education for the people who live in the eastern part of the state. It is the hope, I think, of every parent that their children will be happy and successful. This dream is only made possible with a good education. Now, Montana has provided that opportunity for those who attend the universities in Bozeman and Missoula. The educational needs for those people that live in the western and central part of our state have been met. It's time now to focus our attention on the needs of those who live in the eastern part of the state. These people who are burdened with the additional cost of travel and the expense of all of that, traveling from their homes. The people of Yellowstone County represent 15% of our state's population, and when you add that number to the people that live in eastern Montana, we look at a population that would exceed 200,000 people. Many of those people, their children will seek a college education, and it's my belief that providing that opportunity for them to attend school here at now MSUB could meet those needs at less cost to them. I think it's time for the Board of Regents to recognize the need for an expanded curriculum at MSUB to meet the needs of the students from eastern Montana. it makes sense that our region have a university-level institution capable of responding to the needs and the real-life concerns of those who seek an education in healthcare, in energy, in the business sectors that are part of this region of our state. I believe it's imperative that the legislators from eastern Montana come together with a source of funding to make this possible. The people of our state, especially those of us that live in the eastern part of the state, have read this editorial comment and I think understand the need for the community to come together, as well as our regions to take under consideration an expansion of curriculum and full university status for MSUB. I have prepared a written comment that I would offer for your record, sir. Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bollinger.
Commissioner, members of the board, my name is David Trost. I have the privilege to serve as the president and CEO of St. John's Lutheran Ministries here in Billings, Montana. St. John's is the largest faith-based social ministry organization in the state, providing home health care, hospice, independent living, assisted living, long-term care, and skilled nursing care. In addition to our 130-child enrichment center, we also have offices in 9 cities across the state providing adoption services, birth parent counseling, and disaster relief. My job is simple. It's to provide living opportunities within nurturing environments of hope, dignity, and love. Over my 21 years as administrator at St. John's, I've seen significant changes in the level of care for the clients that we serve. 21 years ago, our average number of admissions at St. John's in the 186 beds of nursing was 50. Last year, 21 years later, we had 468 admissions and 416 discharges back to home. There are primarily 2 reasons for this. The first is that traditional long-term care elders seek us out later in life. And when they come, they need us for a shorter period of time. Second, skilled nursing facilities across the state, especially at St. John's, are integral to the part of healthcare delivery and provide a primary source of recovery and rehabilitation following surgeries for those over 55 years of age. The technical training that you provide at City College is something that we need to continue to offer at City College. This is done in an efficient and a timely fashion. These graduates have the skills needed to be excellent nurses and will continue to depend on them within this community to fill the hundreds of job openings that are available for nurses in Yellowstone County. As I mentioned before, we've seen a transformation in the clients that we serve, thus see an increasing need beyond those technical skills of nursing. Executives like myself seek and desire future nurses with a mastery of writing, communication, advanced assessment, and leadership skills that come with the rigors of a baccalaureate degree. The program being proposed here today, the RN to BSN program, at Montana State University Billings will provide an RN from City College or any Montana RN program with an opportunity to pivot and balance their way between career and education. Why should we stop at Montana alone? Could we see this RN to BSN program be a magnet for students from across the country, providing maybe some summer intensive experiences to experience the community that I love, the state that I love, and to be in a place where we have best-in-class healthcare The institution of medicine sets a national goal that encourages partnerships with the private sector to monitor, advise, and ensure that the diversity of students are prepared for today's workforce needs. Within my role as Chief Executive at St. John's, I'll work with and even challenge MSUB and this Board of Regents to ensure the most creative thinking occurs in advancing nursing professions across Montana. In closing, our community is grateful for the Board of Regents for the continued support of City College's associate degree program, as well as the consideration for the MSUB RN to BSN program. Finally, on a personal note, I had the honor of assisting in the curriculum development in the initial Master's in Health Administration program at MSUB, and was a member of the very first graduating class in 1999. This past May, my wife, Dr. Trost, graduated with the first cohort of doctorate in nursing practice students at MSU Bozeman. As I sit here today, I'll be the first to support the success of the RN to BSN program. Thank you for your time and support.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioner and members of the board. My name is John Felton. I am the President and Chief Executive Officer of Riverstone Health in Billings, as well as the Health Officer for Yellowstone County. Our organization employs nurses in a number of areas. We're the public health agency. We have a large home care and hospice agency. We have a 20,000 patient community health center. We do maternal child health. We employ about a fifth of our workforce is RNs, and I'm here today to support the MSUB application for an accelerated RN to BSN degree. The recent study that was done among nurses in our area showed that about 40% of the respondents did not have a BSN or an advanced degree in nursing. Of those, 80% expressed a desire to earn a BSN, and 65% expressed a desire for an accelerated course. Most of these folks are working. They're looking for ways to advance their careers while maintaining their employment, their families, and those sorts of things. Clearly, the university has a number of customers. Those of us, like my friend and colleague David, who was just here, and myself, we're your customer because we employ your graduates. Those nurses are also customers, and I think you're going to hear pretty loudly that we think this is a good idea. You know, it's axiomatic in healthcare now. We hear over and over and over that we need to create systems of care that allow people to work at the top of their license. I would submit to you that's pretty inadequate. Yes, we need people to work at the top of their license, but the work is more than just the tasks of nursing. It is the things like David mentioned. It's the writing. It's the persuasive work of systems development. It's having frontline people who can look at a system of care and figure out how to make it better, not just from the perspective of delivering care to a single patient, but delivering care to a population of patients in ways that supports the triple aim of healthcare that you'll find many of us in our community are very strongly behind. I think this is a wonderful opportunity for both sets of customers of the university, and I strongly encourage you to support this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Board of Regents, my name is Richard Brown. I'm a businessman here in Billings. I'm Vice President of Wildben Inc., a family-owned business here in town. We mine and make products out of a clay mineral called bentonite. And our business began here, has its roots here in Billings in 1922. My grandfather came to town in 1911. I mention these things because I want you to know that I come here with a long-term perspective on Billings and eastern Montana, both historically and looking into the future. And it's the future aspect that I really want to talk about today. This is somewhat of a follow-up to the comments that you've already heard. You know, there's a unique thing that happens in many communities that have institutions of higher education. It's a symbiosis that occurs between the community and the institution. As one grows, the other grows. And it's a dynamic that I've seen over and over, and I expect that you may have as well as you've traveled around the country. That symbiotic growth has not really occurred here in Billings, unfortunately, with MSUB and its predecessor institutions since it was begun in 1927. And I think part of that is due to the fact that it was begun specifically with the focus of being a teachers institution, an institute to train people to become teachers, which is necessary and obviously laudable, but somewhat limiting, particularly as time went on. As the community grew and the institution stayed somewhat the same, there got to be a divergence. In most communities, you find this vibrant interplay between the institution and the community. And to be sure, there's a good interplay between MSUB and the community, but not in the way that I, as a businessman, would like to see it. If you'll bear with me, there's some facts that I'd like to throw out that I think are important to understand. Over that period of time from 1927 to the present time, Billings has grown, Yellowstone County has grown from about 27,000 people to over 160,000 people. And projections right now are that we're likely to hit 200,000 sometime in the early 2020s. It's the largest city, Billings is the largest city in the state with over 110,000 people. And employment in Billings nearly equals employment in Missoula and Great Falls combined at this point. 15% of all retail sales come out of Billings for the whole state, and more than 25% of those sales for wholesale come out of Billings. So Billings has become a major economic driver in the state of Montana. And it is that for retail, obviously, for the energy sector, even though the energy sector right now is down on its knees, for agriculture, for healthcare, it is a financial center, and increasingly for high-tech industries. Now, predictions are that all this is going to continue to grow in the future. As I suspect you may have heard this morning from the governor, or if you paid attention to the Billings Gazette on Sunday or Monday, there was a guest opinion by the governor where he said, and I quote, it has been an objective of his administration to bring together businesses, educators, and workforce professionals to ensure that we have a pipeline for young Montanans to get the skills they need and for experienced workers to skill up to continue to compete for the jobs of tomorrow. That's of vital importance to me as a businessman, because I need those people in my business in order to allow us to move forward. Despite some significant efforts made by MSUB to assist in this and to develop the skills that are needed in our young people to fit into those future jobs, it hasn't really been successful yet, or as successful as it needs to be. And I personally think that's because MSUB has been limited in the diversity, the scope of offerings that it can make to the community. As part of the overall university system, there has been a parsing out of different programs, different educational units, and MSUB, frankly, has come up lacking in some of that. And that's been honestly to the detriment of the community of Billings, to Yellowstone County, and to eastern Montana. So I'm here because I want to let you know that from a businessman's standpoint, I don't think we can let that status quo continue. Not if MSUB is going to play a role in the vibrant development that Billings is going to have in the future. And as a businessman, I want MSUB to be a part of that. So I'm here as an individual to ask you, as the Board of Regents, the governing body for higher education in Montana, to commit to engaging the Billings, Yellowstone County, and Eastern Montana community, and particularly the business community, for the following things. To, number one, determine what the higher education needs are that are specific to this area. What is required? What do people think is required, especially businesses? And how they can best be met by our local institution, MSUB, so we can keep our educated students here in the community and they don't leave us. And then finally, and this is critical, to support the implementation of a plan that would allow that to happen, so that MSUB can grow with the community and be an integral part to the development of this area that we need it to be. Thank you.
Thank you. Other public comment?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and other board members. My name is B.J. Gilmore. I'm the Chief Nursing Officer at St. Vincent's Healthcare, and it truly is a privilege to be here today and to share with you some of the needs and some of the challenges that we are experiencing currently with the nursing shortage that is going on nationwide. I've obviously been a nurse for quite some time, and I find it really interesting that sometimes the more things change, the more things stay the same. We've cycled through a number of nursing shortages during my career, and there have been many, many other changes that have occurred in healthcare. One of those items that has changed a lot and is really impacting the acute care settings is the number of career opportunities there are for nurses these days. When I first graduated from nursing school, if you were truly a nurse, you went to work in the hospital. And now that's not necessarily what the options are that are available to people. There's many different outpatient, educational, care transitions, occupational health, just to name a few of the opportunities that are available to nursing. And so what that does is that challenges many of us to compete for a very limited pool of professionals to fill the healthcare needs, especially in the acute care setting. One of the other areas that has been a huge challenge for us is the acuity level of our patients keeps getting higher and higher because so much of the care is being transitioned into an outpatient setting. So I would really request that you consider approving this program. I started out as an associate degree nurse very early on in my career and worked for a year and then went into an accelerated BSN program through the University of Utah. Obviously, that was well before the online programs were available, which would have been great at that time, but it really did provide me the opportunity to get my feet on the ground with nursing, to be able to work in the healthcare environment, get more clinical experience, and then to go on to school and finish my BSN. And I really see that as something that is very essential to us right now in order to fill the positions that we need for nurses at the bedside, but then to provide them opportunities where they can go on, especially with an online program, and be able to complete their education. It is a great transition for these associate nurses to be able to do that. And as I mentioned before, the acuity levels of our patients are getting higher and higher. The need for people with further education, not just to the bachelor's degree, but also at the master's degree, to be caring for these patients at the bedside is really essential right now in the nursing field. So I would really encourage you and ask you to support this program and feel that it would be a great asset to our patients and also other people in the state of Montana. And thank you very much for your consideration today.
Thank you. Other public comment?
Good afternoon, Chairman and Board. I'm Lori Smith. I'm the Chief Nursing Officer for Billings Clinic, and like BJ, I began my career as a non-traditional student. I began as a licensed practical nurse right here in Montana and started my career in a critical access hospital. I believe that opportunities that we can afford our students to continue to advance their professional career should be supported by us in any way possible. Billings Clinic is acutely aware of the need for bachelor's prepared nurses in Montana. BSN education is a foundation for creating nurse leaders that lead change and advance healthcare. The ability to retain our current nursing workforce while nurses are in the classroom is critical. This program will allow associate degree nurses to obtain their bachelor's degree while maintaining the commitments they have both at work and at home. Billings Clinic currently employs greater than 300 associate degree prepared nurses. We meet guidelines to maintain our magnet status with regard to BSN rates, and we do support professional advancement of our employees. This new program will provide local and regional access to the necessary education for RNs seeking professional growth and development. Not only would this be a benefit to our local community, but to the state of Montana. And for that reason, Billings Clinic and both I support this program. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other public comment?
Vice Chair Albrecht, members of the board. My name is Sam Forstag. I'm the president of the Associated Students of the University of Montana, of the Montana Associated Students, but first and foremost a student at the University of Montana. Earlier, Deputy Commissioner McCrae mentioned your naming working group. That was the first I'd heard of it, but I commend you on taking a proactive approach to it, and that inspired me to speak to you all and encourage you to incorporate student input in that working group at any point possible. And it seemed like a natural tie-in to a proposal that our Senate passed just this past week, asking that students at the University of Montana be included in our affiliate foundation's board of trustees by implementing an ex officio non-voting member on their board. This is something that already exists on some of the affiliate foundations across the university system. It's a change that's being made actually at the MSU Alumni Foundation, or a bylaw change being voted on this fall at the Alumni Foundation. And it's something that students within ASUM are very enthusiastic about, and that we hope to not just to, issues that have come up in years past regarding naming, but to a broader interest in having an avenue for input and some say in the conversation for what has grown to be one of the largest revenue sources for our university and is of direct interest to one of the largest stakeholder groups, obviously, at the university, students. That this is something that, as of right now, may not come before the board, but something that I would love to hear back from any board members that are interested in, and that I wholeheartedly hope can be finished by this year, those bylaw changes, so that whoever my successor may be will have the opportunity to provide input in that conversation. More broadly speaking on the topic of student input, at the beginning of today's meeting, you talked about some initiatives that OCHI would be taking and the board may be taking regarding mission differentiation, state allocation methodology, tuition, financial aid, and this broader discussion also is something that I would highly encourage you to reach out to your student resources over at the Montana Associated Students or at the respective student governing bodies for input as it may pertain to those questions. These are obviously things that are of high interest to the students that they affect, and while I know we have a student regent on the board who has been incredibly accessible and incredibly helpful, I also know that we have representatives at all these student governments, in all these student governments, who would be very enthusiastic to become a part of that conversation and would love to help serve on any working groups or whatever expeditious committees are being formed through OCHI to answer these questions that have long-term implications for the universities that we attend. at the University of Montana, we have a very strong shared governance system that we have at many of the institutions throughout the system, and we have the opportunity to provide input and to be part of the discussion in a wide range of committees, be they search committees, be they grievance committees. And I have found that student input is valuable not just in the broader questions and the strategic level issues that are being discussed, but in some of the more particular specific issues that may otherwise be passed over if you weren't to have a student voice in that conversation. And so as you are discussing things like a tuition, the possible future of tuition across the system, how financial aid is allocated, be it at the state level or at the university level, I think myself and many of the students that I work to represent every day and that joined me and came here last night to vote on, say, our legislative priorities for the Montana Associated Students would love to be a part of that conversation. And I encourage you to reach out to us as well, be that through OCHE or through our student regent that serves on the board. Thank you for the opportunity to talk with you, and have a wonderful evening. I may be the last public comment, or I believe there are students actually following for public comment.
Thank you, Sam.
Hi. We're a little late because we went to the other campus. Well, winded Alex is coming. He's parking. Hi. Thank you for taking the time to be here and listen to these comments today. My name is Haley Cox. I'm a junior at MSU, and it's good to see you guys again. I'm here to reiterate my adamant support for changing the renaming process in the Montana University system. Beyond that, I believe a comprehensive evaluation of funding would greatly benefit the students. I see conversations being had through letters to the editors at the Bozeman Daily Chronicle with people in the community stepping in to protest MSU's affiliation with organizations such as the Koch Foundation, which I know was grant and has absolutely nothing to do with the tributes policy. But the point here isn't the situation, it's the conversation. It seems as though, more than anything, MSU's campus and students have become a political pawn tossed about by individuals and organizations likely to benefit significantly from their affiliation with our institution. Montana State University is a land-grant public university funded by Montana's citizens with the express purpose of educating Montana's sons and daughters and everyone in between. This is a purpose that we must be loyal to. Our university system's history of providing quality education to Montana's citizens and economic success to our communities is being taken advantage of to build clout for outsiders. Serving students, also expressly listed as the purpose of the Montana University system, cannot happen on behalf of the students. Students are best served when they have a say in their university system. We must remember that our universities not only serve as a training ground for Montana's workforce, but as a platform for civic virtue. My peers and I are learning how to engage in our communities, the university being the primary community in our lives when we leave home. A little bit of an update from our side on campus. We've been working tirelessly to make MSU a more accepting place for all students, turning the unfortunate affiliation with Greg Gianforte into a catalyst for positive change on our campus. MSU will now have their first ever diversity inclusion plan. And the students, the computer science department has funded 4 students to attend the Out in STEM conference in Denver. ASUM has also asked for a student seat on the UM Foundation, which we'd like to throw our support behind from the MSU campus because it will ensure that the student voice is heard in Missoula as well. The ball now falls in your court, and basically I'm here to say that as the students, we're willing to do anything that we can to help you guys in this process, and we're willing to give you any input. We fully understand that this is a systematic problem and that it stems from the legislature's failure to properly fund the university system. We feel the strain, and we know that you guys are too. And this is an issue that's problematic nationwide. We fully intend to participate in our state legislature and work on funding for the university system this spring. And so please let us know if there's anything more from the student or community side of this issue that we can do in order to help you guys with this process and have input. I also would like to thank you guys for the update today. I was watching the live feed in the car, so it was good to see that. And thank you for your time. And Alex is here.
Thank you, Haley.
Hello, my name is Alex Lee. I'm a junior at the film program at Montana State University in Bozeman. And a couple of months ago, I gave public comment to show my opposition to the GN40 donation. And I'm glad to say today that the Montana State University and the administration has done a lot of good work to turn something that does kind of reflect negatively on our system into something really positive to increase diversity at our school. And I hope we can continue to do this in the future. And I also hope that we can start working to change this issue at its roots. I know I'm going to be at the state legislature at the next session and bringing more students there to try to lobby to get more funding to the Montana university system so that we can avoid these awkward situations in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the board, Mr. Commissioner. My name is Dave Wanzenried. I'm here representing myself today. Deciding here, listening to you, I've decided you don't have enough to do. There's a number of things that are being done in Billings, and Chancellor Nook is leading the charge here to ensure that the next century of MSU Billings is more robust and better than it's been from the first century. But there's a larger issue that needs to be addressed. And that has to do with the governance of the system and the integration that took place with the university system in 1994. The variables that were in play that brought about that integration have changed. The world has changed, and Montana has changed. This region has changed. And I'd like to ask the board, concurrent with the activities that are going to take place, and I'm sure that the Chancellor, being the capable administrator he is, he'll ask Mr. Brown and Mr. Bollinger to join in with their energy and their ideas. But I want to ask the board to take on a responsibility concurrent with that, to take a look at how the integration has affected MSU Billings as one more part of that activity. To take a look at the variables that are in play today and ask yourself the hard question: is it working? Is that part of what's happening here in Billings with enrollment? I think it is, and a lot of people that I'm standing here representing feel the same way. I need to ask you to do the hard questions, and I don't presume to know what the answer is. Well, I've talked to several of you since I sent the message through one of your Regent members here. I don't know what the answer looks like. I don't know what the model is that we need to look at, but I can tell you that you need to take a look at a higher level of autonomy for this school as a part of the activity to complement the efforts of the Chancellor. I don't know what that looks like. I was even asked what committee would have jurisdiction over that. I don't know the answer to that. I can tell you, if I look at it, I'll tell you how the work plan would look. But I believe that the university system deserves better in Billings, and this region deserves better outcomes. And I think that the governance of the system behooves you to take a look at extending additional autonomy here. There are dozens of models in the United States you can choose from. It doesn't have to become a flagship. And one of the questions I got in an email was, well, how much would it cost if we had 3 flagships? I don't know. But I can tell you we're missing opportunities every single day that we defer taking action to take a look at the hard questions. This board has the authority to make decisions to extend more autonomy. It made the decision to integrate. It can make the decision to deintegrate it along a scale that's appropriate for the level of service that's going to be required in this region. And I want to ask you, I want to implore you as a Board of Regents to take this on as an assignment on behalf, not me, not the people in Billings, not the people in Yellowstone County, but the eastern part of this state. Everybody's concerned about what's happening in Glendive and what's happening in Miles City with higher education. And I think the hub needs to move eastward. And I think the place it needs to be is in Billings. And I'd ask you to take a look at the models that are appropriate to fit that as a part of the resolution of the enrollment crisis that we have here, the budget crisis we have here, to offer a more robust curriculum that can be taken directly to the board without being filtered through MSU Bozeman. Yeah, I'm a Grizz, and I don't have any axe to grind with MSU. But I can tell you there's a culture, I think, that's damaged this campus in Billings. It's not a reflection of anybody's leadership. We're all caretakers. Things are going to change. But please, take this on in the spirit of being open and willing to engage in a conversation with this community and this region to see if we can do better at governing the system and providing more autonomy for Billings in doing that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further public comment?
Sorry I arrived late. My name's Dennis Sulcer. I represent St. Vincent Healthcare, and I come to you in front of you. First of all, thank you for holding your meeting here in Billings. Second of all, I'm here as a product of the university system, both University of Montana, a graduate degree there, as well as Montana State University. So I'm not aligning either way, but I am aligning for healthcare, and selfishly, I am here advocating expansion of healthcare programs, and would implore you to consider expanding nursing programs, as well as occupational therapy program plan, and consider a plan for that, whether it's based here or elsewhere in the state of Montana. Of course, selfishly, we would like to see that those kinds of programs and healthcare programs based here in Billings, where we feel we have a tremendous medical corridor that can help support that kind of programming right here in our fair city. Thank you, and I appreciate again your presence here in Billings.
Thank you.
Hello, my name's Karen Costello. I'm just tag teaming Dennis. He didn't know I'd be here, and I wasn't sure he'd be here. But I just wanted to take his comments just a little bit further and speak out in behalf of the allied health programs. We started a program with the RadTech program several years ago, and I can't tell you the difference that it's made for the feeding of our programs at both hospitals. And I would argue it's helped to lower the cost of health care, because we've been able to spend less money on recruitment, and we've also had control of the quality of the training that program has had. So when we talk about the expansion of the health allied programs, I think there's many places to go, and it can only benefit both hospitals. So I also thank you for that, but would like to look at the expansion of all those programs. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further public comment? Further public comment? Seeing none, I would like to go ahead and recess today's meeting. Oh, Regent Nystuen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a personal note that unfortunately, due to a prior business commitment, I can't be at the meeting tomorrow, and just wanted to send my sincere appreciation to Chancellor Nook and his team for the great hospitality. This conversation that we've had, especially with regards to the Billings community leaders, has been incredibly insightful from a guy from the Flathead to come over and to hear more about it. I'm impressed with the Billings work that you're doing here and so forth. I'm going to feel sorry that I'm going to miss your breakfast tomorrow morning with a large group of community leaders and so forth. While I can't specifically vote for the consent agenda, from the administrative and budget side, I'm certainly supportive of that, as well as the operating budget that we reviewed this afternoon. All the various action items, including the Romney Hall programming and design, I think I should go on record as personally being supportive of that. I, too, am hugely engaged in wanting to see the naming group move forward here. I think we've got great opportunities to do a better job in that area. Also, along with the Staff and Compensation Committee and the Academic Research and Student Affairs Committee, doesn't look like there's anything in there that's of big concern, but I just would like to just tell you I'm sorry I'm going to miss tomorrow's part of the meeting, and thank you all for a great time here in Billings, and wish I was here tomorrow too. So thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Commissioner.
Thank you, Regent Nystuen. At that, I will go ahead and we will recess today's meeting. We will resume tomorrow at 8:15 a.m. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for your engagement and your investment. Chancellor Nook, did you want to make a final announcement?
Yeah, just to make sure everybody knows where they're going next for the reception and the things at our teal room. You need to follow the directions on the map, and when you get to the parking structure, go to the second or third floor and you'll be able to walk across the walkway to our College of Business building. We'll have people help you find the room from there. But thank you.
Thank you.